Chapter 41. Unbelievable Coincidence. When they reached the auditorium, Ryan drew his silver sword in his right hand and hefted an iron shield in his left, stepping forward while Kate fell into line on his left. Kate's expression was solemn. She didn't speak, but the slight lift of her brow told him it was time. Ryan shot her a questioning glance, but she only nodded. Without another word, she lifted a small gavel and struck the bronze bell at the center of the chamber's dais. Dang, dang, the resonant peals echoed through the rafters. In an instant, with a collective snap, every torch lining the auditorium guttered out. Darkness swallowed the castle, turning it into a vast, silent hunt. No one could tell which side, hunters or hunted, would emerge victorious. Somewhere overhead, bats scratched their wings against stone, and Ryan caught himself scanning the shadows for the gleam of vampire eyes. Kate chose the narrow stairwell leading to the second floor, and Ryan fell into step ahead of her. He swept his sword in wide, nervous arcs. Each swing felt clumsy, as if he'd never held a blade before. Still, the shield was an extension of his arm, never dropping below chest height. Somewhere along the walls, long strands of cobweb brushed against his face, and the bats overhead clicked and cheered in protest at their disturbance. Ryan's silver eyes flicked through the gloom, hinting at the impatience coiled just beneath his calm. He knew this was more than a simple trial of strength. It was a game of wits. And for the first time in months, the Muggle detective within him took command. He squared his shoulders, fixed the shield before him, and prepared to unravel whatever surprise the castle had in store. Chapter 7. The Silver Net. Ryan prided himself on being reckless and headstrong, surely the best way to lure vampires into striking first. He believed that every skirmish infused fresh energy into the magic of his heart. So when he turned a shadowed corner on the second-floor hallway and found nothing but empty stone walls, he frowned in frustration. His enhanced vision revealed no movement, no telltale glint of fangs, nothing at all. He tapped the hilt of his sword, wondering if he'd misjudged the castle's layout. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, the toll of a distant bell echoed through a long-forgotten chamber. Salvatore stirred within his ornate coffin and rose without a trace of haste. He swung the lid open, stretching before stepping onto the cold marble floor. His eyes burned a fierce crimson as he released dozens of bats into the rafters and corridors. Each creature's glowing red gaze served as a living network, feeding every corner of the castle back to him. Below, 2 intruders paused at the far end of the corridor. One clutched a flickering torch in one hand and a silver sword in the other, standard equipment for any monster hunter. The other, a diminutive witch, held something far more unusual, a silver net, its mesh glinting dully in the torchlight. Salvatore's lips curved into a confident smile. 2 hunters, 4 weapons. I can't believe my luck, he murmured. But a silver net? Who in their right mind would bring that? No ordinary warrior would ever choose such a trap. He sat back on his haunches, watching as the bats reported every detail. The hunters had no idea he was so close. Their weapons, common as they were, would prove no match for a centuries-old vampire lord. With a slow, deliberate breath, Salvatore prepared to remind them why he ruled these halls unchallenged. No self-respecting wizard who knows vampire lore would ever drape themselves in a strand of garlic the way Muggles do. It's just too undignified. Yet for Salvatore Stefan, misfortune has struck with uncanny precision. Torches, silver nets, and a garlic necklace all lie ominously together in this crypt. He never expected them to be deployed at once, unless ghost hunter Sir Kate had planned it all along. Perfect, Salvatore muttered under his breath. The lethal kit's strapped to that little witch. Time to get serious. He pressed a hidden button beside the sarcophagus and felt the mechanism click. With a groan of stone on stone, a section of wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage. I'll strike from behind, little wizards, he whispered, slipping into the darkness. Your nightmare begins now. His boots made only the faintest scratch against the floor. 1 step, 2 steps, 1 step, 2 steps. Salvatore's senses stretched to keep watch on both the hallway ahead and the gallery above. Frigid sweat beaded on his brow. Juggling 2 viewpoints was pushing him to his limit. Still, he reassured himself. At least the little wizard down there looks like an easy target. With that thought steeling his resolve, Salvatore advanced into the shadows, ready to unleash the full horror of his arsenal. Salvatore huffed in frustration. Why couldn't he look as dashing in real life as he did in his favorite novels? He'd won this post because of his plain, unremarkable looks, yet plain and unremarkable was exactly how he felt standing here, cornered in a cramped room. With a sudden flash of claws, he sprang into action. A pale, nondescript vampire, himself, lunged at the intruders. His target, a silver-tinged garlic necklace swinging at the human's throat. The strike should have shredded it, but instead his claws met something far harder and colder, an iron shield. Ugh! Salvatore staggered back from the recoil, teeth gritted. The blow might have snapped a lesser set of claws, but he forced himself to stay on his feet. The boy with the shield, so annoyingly quick, took a step back and held up a hand, signaling his companion. From the shadows rushed a second attacker, a girl brandishing twin torches in one hand, a silver net in the other. She threw the net wide, flames dancing along its mesh. The air filled with the acrid stench of garlic and the scorching heat of burning wick. Salvatore recoiled. These pretty boys react too fast, he snarled inwardly, rubbing at the cuts where garlic juice had stung his skin. And these little brats with their torches. How am I supposed to fight when everything's on fire and coated in silver? He willed himself to transform into a bat, but the net's silver strands tightened at the crucial moment, pinning his limb. Heart-pounding, Salvatore's eyes darted around the tiny chamber. Then he saw it, a narrow crack between the wall and floorboards, just wide enough to slip through. Summoning every ounce of strength, he twisted, levering himself toward that slim gap. If he could just squeeze through, he'd vanish into the night, and come back for revenge. Black smoke billowed through the gap Ryan had deliberately pried open, and at once the bats roosting on the ceiling poured out into the night. Kate watched them flee, but made no move to pursue. Confusion flickered in her eyes. It's still early, Kate, Ryan said softly. Catching him now would be pointless. Kate's brow furrowed, then she nodded with surprising gravity. You're right. Hidden among the fluttering swarm, Salvatore trembled uncontrollably. Under normal circumstances, he would have hurled himself after the tourists through the secret passage or transformed into a bat and struck from above. Instead, he'd been driven back into the auditorium's safe zone, forced to cower in the shadows. Danger, danger. How had it come to this? He thought, panic clutching at his chest. Most vampire hunters were half-breeds, half-vampire, half-muggle, relying on non-magical tools and conventional hunting methods. Pureblood wizards were rare among their ranks. Those few who did possess wizard blood were effectively immune to vampire assaults, their magical lineage a constant shield. Many hunters traced their origins to unions between wizards and vampires, a free love legacy that ensured no single faction could amass overwhelming power. Salvatore took a cautious step backward, his eyes narrowing. He was almost certain these two children were the latest scions of an old line of vampire hunters, and that they'd retained every ounce of their ancestors' training. It was ridiculous. Ever since, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures had been founded, and the code of treatment of non-wizarding semi-humans enforced. Attacks by vampires or those who hunted them had all but vanished. Yet here they were, and of course he was the unlucky one to stumble into them. The kids' weapons crackled with arcane energy, each strike stinging with magical force. Salvatore winced, recalling his last brush, a former Quidditch beater turned wizard wielding an enchanted club that left him bruised and bleeding for days. He forced himself to inhale slowly. Bring it on, he muttered under his breath. I'm here to become a vampire star. Tourists milling nearby might complain if the demonstration turned violent, but so what? Even if the department docked a bit from his paycheck, he'd still come out ahead. Salvatore, don't be a fool, he told himself. You're not in this for money. You're here for the dream. This is destiny, the final showdown between vampire and vampire hunter. He pressed himself against the shadowed wall of the alley, summoned the shift, and in an instant, his form snapped back to human. There, cloaked in darkness, he braced himself for whatever came next. Salvatore's hand hovered over the hidden latch before he pressed it. The wall slid open with barely a whisper, revealing a narrow corridor lit only by the moonlight streaming through a crack in the stones. He inched forward on silent toes, every muscle coiled, breath caught in his chest. On Ryan's head, the little bat-shaped amulet suddenly glowed a faint red, so dim that no one but a vampire could notice it. Salvatore watched it pulse, ready to spring into action the moment they needed him. "Ryan, what if he doesn't show?" Kate murmured, her voice tight with worry. Yet there was a flicker of excitement in her eyes, a childish thrill. She'd just survived the agony of cramming in exams, and bizarrely, she was more than ready for round 2. "Shh," Ryan said, tilting his head as if he'd never heard of secret passages or bats that glowed. He pressed a finger to his lips, feigning innocent ignorance. "He's already here." Chapter 42, A Helpless Solution. The rasping echoes of bats drifted through the gloom as Kate and Ryan crouched in the cavern's far corner. "Do you think she'll show up again?" Kate whispered, her eyes never leaving the shadows. "It feels like the wait is getting longer each time." Ryan, clutching the haft of his apprentice's staff, gave a half-hearted shrug. His magic was still that of a fledgling wizard, no match for most creatures of the night. Yet so far, none of the vampire ambushes had gotten past Kate. Time and again, she'd blocked each assault with cool precision, turning every trap into an opportunity to strike back. Kate had begun to notice a pattern. Each appearance of the vampire seemed designed to herd her to specific spots within the cave. It was almost as if the attacker was laying a cunning trap, one she deftly sidestepped every time. Ryan joked that she must have triggered the cave's whole map trap herself, knowing exactly where the vampire would strike. He still couldn't believe how she'd once slipped in behind the enemy during a cursed transformation ambush and taken the predator out with a single flawless sneak attack. Not even Ryan had seen her coming. 15 more minutes dragged by before Ryan stiffened, a wry smile curling at the corner of his lips. "Here we go again," he murmured. Just then, a jagged bolt of black lightning split the darkness. Ryan whirled on instinct, raising his staff to ward off a sudden rain of bats, bursting from the shadows. Kate tensed, muscles coiled for battle. The vampire had set its trap, and this time, Kate and Ryan might be walking straight into it. Kate sprang forward, snatching the small black bat in both hands. Ryan said nothing. Better to let everyone assume it was a vampire. After all, a little confusion could be entertaining. No sooner had Kate corralled the creature than a swirl of inky mist, invisible to the eye, coalesced around her grip. From the shadows emerged a pale, unremarkable vampire, his plain features belying a sharp cunning. He might have been reaching for a torch, a silver net, or a strand of garlic, anything to protect against the undead. Perhaps Providence had denied him striking looks, but made up for it with guile. "You little brat," he spat, voice edged with anger. "Of all the mortals, why did it have to be you? Are you mocking me?" He let out an exasperated sigh, as if he'd already conceded defeat. Is this the downfall of humanity or the collapse of decency? Ryan stepped forward, calm and collected. "Quiet," he instructed, voice cool. The vampire's fierce glare only sharpened his unexpected handsomeness. Then, with a glint of delight in his eyes, the vampire asked, "Tell me, can you read minds? How else would you know what I'm thinking?" Ryan feigned innocence. "You just said it," he replied softly. Salvatore's lips curved into a thrill-seeking grin. Kate pressed her lips together to hide a grin. "You heard Ryan just now," muttering to himself. "It was oddly entertaining. So, dear guest, do you wish to continue?" Salvatore drew in a slow breath and forced a courteous smile. "Naturally I must. I recall that beyond us lie more than a few traps." Ryan's lips twitched. "Yet neither you nor this delightful lady fled, or even considered splitting up." Kate chuckled. "Oh, Ryan, she called me lady. How charming. It seems this vampire might not be entirely useless. After all, vampires are always rather handsome, aren't they?" Salvatore pretended not to have heard, desperate to avoid further teasing. But as he studied them, a bold and hitherto unthinkable notion crossed his mind, one completely at odds with his usual methods. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Lane, Miss Kate, behind this castle lies the largest dragon farm in Romania, and in fact the entire world. You can even observe the dragon ecology up close from the top of the castle," Salvatore announced with a gracious bow. "If you'll allow me, I'd be honored to serve as your guide and unveil the rare wonders hidden within these walls." Dressed impeccably as ever, the vampire gentleman led Ryan and Kate through the castle's dimly lit first floor. One by one, He demonstrated the mechanical traps and secret passages tucked behind false panels and beneath loose stones. Pressure plates triggered dart launchers, rotating walls slid aside to reveal unopened chambers, and trapdoors yawned at the push of a hidden lever. To Ryan, the devices felt more tedious than thrilling, just polished metal and cunning engineering, but Kate's eyes sparkled with appreciation for their ingenuity and authenticity. At last, Salvatore halted in a torchlit corridor. "It's time for lunch," he declared. Almost on cue, soft chamber music began to play from unseen corners. The torches snapped back to life with fresh flames, and the bats that had flitted overhead melted into the shadows. The transformation was so abrupt that Ryan couldn't shake the odd sensation of being back in his old high school cafeteria, complete with ambient muzak and the hush before a noon bell. Despite the countless secret passages, none served the ground floor's traffic flow. They existed purely for defense. So after circling the first level, Ryan and Kate found themselves back where they started. Salvatore smiled knowingly. "This castle has 5 floors in total. We'll ascend level by level, but the true spectacle awaits on the 5th floor, our rooftop observatory. There you'll witness the natural habitat of the elusive Romanian longhorn dragons. If fortune favors us today, we might even glimpse one in flight." With that promise in mind, the trio proceeded to the grand dining hall, where a luncheon worthy of nobles awaited. The castle's mysteries would have to wait. First, they would feast, then venture higher, inching ever closer to the dragons themselves. He had been lucky. For its own protection, the castle was warded not only with the standard Muggle-repelling charm, but also with a specialized dragon-repelling curse. Such spells, it turns out, are surprisingly common among Muggle communities. Otherwise, why would no ordinary person ever report seeing a dragon in the city? It's just one more sign of how intertwined the wizarding and non-magical worlds really are. Even the Malfoy stronghold, home to the proud purebloods who despise Muggles, sits directly on the edge of a busy Muggle road. As they crossed the threshold into the great dining hall, Kate's nose twitched at the aromas drifting through the air. No wonder. After that frantic chase, she was absolutely starving. Before them lay an extraordinary spread. Steaming cabbage rolls, sausages as thick as fingers, a tangy meatball and sauerkraut soup, rich beef and potato stew, glistening roasted pork knuckles, and mounds of creamy cornmeal. "Mr. Lane, Miss Kate," Vampire Salvatore intoned, dipping into a low bow, "permit me to introduce our final offering, papanache." He pointed to a delicate, pink-glazed donut gently drizzled with yogurt, a traditional dessert from Transylvania. Ryan's gaze barely lingered on the sweet pastry. He folded his arms, scanning the buffet with a frown. "I'm still wondering," he grumbled, "why there's no rice." Kate didn't hesitate to go back for seconds of the final course, a light, sweet dessert that she declared absolutely divine. Salvatore then brought out the region's true staple, mamaliga, a thick porridge made from ground cornmeal. "You tear off a chunk," he demonstrated, "spread it with sour cheese, then top it with fresh cream." Ryan eyed the mound of porridge curiously. "Good heavens, that's rich," he laughed after his first bite. "I'm glad there's bread alongside it." Next appeared a tangy meatball soup, brightened with a generous squeeze of fresh lemon. Ryan admitted that sour soups weren't usually his thing, yet this one won him over instantly. Leaning in, Salvatore whispered, "The secret ingredient is a sprig of lavender grass." He dropped the fragrant herb into Ryan's bowl, and the floral hint proved unexpectedly perfect. Finally, Salvatore explained the proper way to enjoy these dishes together. He placed a cabbage roll, filled with a savory mix of pea, orc, and beef, on a dollop of mamaliga. He sliced the robust sausage and presented it with thick slices of crusty bread, a smear of sharp mustard, and, surprisingly, a small dish of rendered lard. "Here," Salvatore said, "we tear off sausage, spread it on bread with raw onion, and wash it down with a shot of plum brandy." Ryan shook his head in amazement. No salt, no pepper, just bold, honest flavors that captured the spirit of this land. Ryan and Kate pushed back from the table, surveying the empty plates and half-finished bowls scattered across Salvatore's first-floor dining hall. "Every dish here has a powerful punch," Ryan remarked, rubbing his chin. "It's as if the chef is the reincarnation of the Salt King. Each bite is drenched in seasoning. Somehow, though, it still works." He picked up a piece of pork elbow and separated the skin. Let's see how this goes. He chewed once, then shook his head. Too tough, more like a hard crackle than tender fat. Tastes like roasted rind. Not exactly my favorite. From behind the counter, Salvatore beamed with undisguised pride. I've been rehearsing a grand menu introduction program for weeks, he announced. It's a shame no one's given me the chance to perform it. Kate exchanged a look with Ryan. He held up a half-eaten cabbage roll and raised an eyebrow. Did you even test your own enchantments? There's a subtle fear spell woven into every cloth and cushion down here. If I hadn't cast my Phoenix Peace charm, ordinary wizards would have bolted before dessert. Salvatore froze. I only wanted to heighten their sense of taste, he stammered. Ryan stood and brushed crumbs from his sleeve. Well, you heightened something all right. He grinned at Kate. Shall we see what Salvatore's hiding upstairs? I hear the second floor is even more magical. With that, they climbed the spiral staircase, leaving Salvatore to fume quietly over his misplaced enchantments. Whatever awaited them on the next level, it promised to be far more interesting than oversalted pork skin. Chapter 43, Harry Potter in Silence. I've never tried raising a fox, but anyone who has will tell you two things. They're fiercely independent, and they love nothing more than digging. Those telltale habits were on full display here. Inside the castle's second and third floors, the stone walls had been hollowed into a labyrinth of dens and secret passages. For Ryan, it was the first time he'd witnessed magic so plainly at work. Kate's warning about the unnatural parts of the castle finally clicked into place. Without powerful enchantments reinforcing it, this centuries-old fortress, already twisted and rebuilt more times than anyone could count, would have collapsed long ago under its own weight. Clinging to the walls were curious, trigger-activated devices that looked oddly muggle, yet thrummed with arcane energy whenever a hidden door swung open. In the stillness between classes, bats and spiders made these tunnels their home, emerging in silent flocks. Remarkably, there was no dampness or musty odor, a sure sign that someone had cast a strong containment charm to keep the air fresh and trap any foul smell inside the stone. Kate had cautioned him, lose your wand in this maze, and you might spend an entire day trying to find your way back out. It sounded like a nightmare of wandering corridors and vanished exits. But Kate herself was exhilarated. She darted ahead, slipping from one concealed doorway to the next as she explored every hidden route between the second and third floors. Her boundless energy only highlighted how weary Ryan's mind was growing with each twist and turn. I haven't cast a spell in nearly a morning, and already I feel an odd sinking emptiness. To distract myself, I let my thoughts drift back to the nature of magic itself. It's a self-renewing force, practically infinite, and in Smith's alchemical codex, it even earns the name Ouroboros. Strange that I never noticed before how keenly I can sense its ever-building flow, far more sharply than most wizards I know. Accumulation, I whisper to the silent room. The word brings something else to mind, obscurus. An obscurus is born when a young witch or wizard, whether from fear of discovery or pressure from disbelieving relatives, suppresses their magic so completely that it turns corrosive. Magic, after all, springs from the soul. Stifled and repressed, it festers into a dark, parasitic energy that clings to its host. Left unchecked, this force can erupt in a sudden, devastating burst, destroying everything and everyone in its path. Most tragically, children who carry an obscurus rarely live past 10 years of age. Now, more than ever, I understand the danger of shunning my own powers. The emptiness gripping me isn't mere boredom, it's the first stirrings of something far more sinister. Ryan. In the wizarding world, an obscurus is a volatile, parasitic magical force, often invisible, sometimes manifesting as a swirling black mist or an oily, cloud-like substance laced with a flickering red core. Witnesses have described it as a gust of pitch-black wind, a writhing mass pierced by gleaming white eyes, and on occasion even taking on a grotesque spectral face. The Death Eater's ability in the films to dissolve into black smoke and fly likely draws on this same concept. But in this universe, only Voldemort, and during Harry's 7th year, Severus Snape, have ever been known to master it. In essence, this transformation is a specialized technique, an outlet for repressed, oppressive magic that shatters the usual boundaries of spellcasting. The Obscurus and its human host are two sides of the same coin, bound together as if they form a single, otherworldly creature. Its size and strength mirror both the depth of the host's magical power and the intensity of their negative emotions and inner turmoil. The stronger the magic, and the darker the rage or fear, the more formidable the obscurus becomes. In extreme cases, an obscurus can be catastrophically destructive. It can fling objects aside or shatter them without ever touching them. Yet, if the obscurus encounters someone it trusts, it will slowly calm and, little by little, revert to its original human host. Strong emotions can tip it back and forth between its violent and its dormant states, and should the host die, the obscurus vanishes along with them. Ryan's mind snapped to a famous precedent. Newt Scamander once managed to separate the obscurus from Credence Barebone after his apparent death and lock it inside a magically sustained energy field. He could almost see the glowing cage Newt used, humming with restrained power. Then Ryan thought of Harry Potter. How strange, he mused, that Dumbledore, who had watched Harry grow from a baby, never seemed to grasp the true nature of an obscurus. The headmaster was always one step ahead of most wizards, yet this fundamental magical phenomenon had apparently eluded him. As these thoughts churned, Ryan let his mind relax. He slipped seamlessly back into his everyday persona, Ryan the adventurer, the somewhat ordinary young wizard. He recalled the afternoons spent playing tag with Kate in the castle's sunlit hallways. From the corners of his memory, deeper reflections began to surface, weaving in details from Harry's own story. How his aunt and uncle loathed magic, not out of spite but fear, and mistreated Harry with a cold, unfeeling cruelty designed to snuff out any spark of wizardry in him. Ryan paused, realizing how these threads of thought, Newt's daring rescue of an obscurus, Dumbledore's blind spots, the Dursleys' oppressive cruelty, echoed one another. Each illustrated the fragile balance between magic and emotion, and how trust, or its absence, could tip that balance toward devastation or redemption. Chapter: The Dursleys' Desperate Flight. From the moment Harry's first Hogwarts letter arrived, Vernon Dursley's determination to shield him from all things magical became absolute. He refused to accept a single envelope, despite the mailbox erupting in bursts of magic and the entire house being besieged by owls. When owls perched at every window and the mail slot exploded, the Dursleys knew ordinary precautions wouldn't suffice. In a panic, Vernon and Petunia whisked Harry and Dudley, their spoiled, bullying nephew, away to a remote, storm-lashed island. They hoped that total isolation would sever Harry's last ties to the wizarding world, but the storm proved more lethal than they imagined. In the roar of thunder and the lash of surf against sharp rocks, Dudley slipped and fell. The accident claimed his life, a grim testament to how far the Dursleys' obsession had gone. Yet even under 11 years of relentless oppression, an ordeal many believed would produce an obscurus, Harry remained intact. He never became the haunted obscurial that fearmongers predicted. Wizards attribute that miracle to Lily Potter's final, selfless act of love. Her sacrificial protection, woven into Harry's very skin, prevented any dark force from taking root. Still, suppressed magic does not simply vanish. Over the years, Harry's latent power only grew stronger, forging a well of potential that would serve him well in later trials. Although his raw talent would never rival Voldemort's, he was no longer at an inherent disadvantage. It was this promise of power and Harry's unwavering spirit that earned Newt Scamander a special place in Albus Dumbledore's confidence. Newt's rise as Dumbledore's favorite disciple only deepened Gellert Grindelwald's envy, setting the stage for conflicts yet to come. Why, then, has Dumbledore never studied the preserved obscurus? Rumor has it that its original host was none other than Albus Dumbledore himself, his bloodline tracing back to Credence Barebone. Yet the great headmaster refused even to examine it, as if determined to keep that secret buried. Even more curious is Mrs. Arabella Figg, Harry's unassuming neighbor. She's a squib, one planted by Dumbledore to spy on the boy who lived. All these threads point back to Albus, who, it turns out, never held back Harry's power. On the contrary, his regimen of silent tempering, an obscure blend of meditation and de-sharpening incantations, does more than strengthen resolve. It unlocks magical potential. Harry's ability to conjure a fully formed Patronus in his 3rd year stands as living proof. It wasn't until I traveled through time that I discovered an even stranger detail. Dumbledore derives from an Old English word for bumblebee, and of course he's famous for his love of sweets, this old bee buzzing through Hogwarts corridors. The more I learn, the more I see his cunning. He carefully positions every piece on the wizarding chessboard, always 3 moves ahead. So how could Voldemort, driven by obsession, stand a chance? In raw power, the Dark Lord might rival Dumbledore, but he's shackled by his Horcruxes, his magic too rigid to adapt. Albus, by contrast, outsmarts him at every turn. Had Dumbledore been younger, or bold enough to create a Horcrux of his own, Voldemort would never have had the opportunity to rise. In the end, it isn't sheer force, but strategy that rules this war. And on that board, Dumbledore has always been the true master. Faced with the countless damned souls trapped in Azkaban, Dumbledore's last resort, when he saw no hope of outright victory, was to create Horcruxes of his own. Voldemort, once immortal and unstoppable, would have been reduced to something worse than a wraith, like a mouse glued to a sheet of parchment, if Dumbledore had been willing to set aside his moral scruples. Even without knowing every one of the Dark Lord's hidden Horcruxes, he could have broken Voldemort's hold on life within a year of his resurrection during Harry's 4th year at Hogwarts. In the original tale, Dumbledore's death is remembered as an act of supreme courage. But perhaps, at that point, the world's greatest white wizard had simply lost faith in any other path to victory. His legend, after all, was far more complicated than it first appeared. Chapter 44. Neville, the boy who survived countless disasters. Shaking off his momentary distraction, Ryan slipped effortlessly back into his usual train of thought. No one around him would have guessed he'd been elsewhere for an instant. Even while his mind wandered, he'd continued to explore the castle alongside Kate, seamlessly scanning every corridor and chamber. Now they stood on the 4th floor, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though they'd stepped into an entirely different realm. This level was encased in what looked like solid rock, the result of a flawlessly executed, undetectable enchantment. Its rugged natural appearance jarred strangely against the castle's familiar Gothic arches and stained glass windows. Clearly, it was a brand new attraction, slated to open for visitors the very next day. Whoever designed it must have been well-versed in Muggle leisure pursuits. Every wall here was sculpted into sheer cliffs, some soaring hundreds of feet overhead. The only route to the 5th floor was by scaling these rock faces. There were no ropes or pulleys in sight, as you'd find in a typical Muggle climbing gym. Instead, the entire floor was warded by a protective cushion of magic, an invisible safety net that rendered any fall harmless. With that enchantment in place, you could climb with absolute confidence, ascending boldly toward the castle's upper reaches. Protection spells rippled beneath their feet, ensuring that even a fall wouldn't leave a bruise. Salvatore swept his arm toward a corner on the left. If you're keen to reach the 5th floor, there's a 2-meter rock wall over there. The footholds are simple. Anyone can manage it. Kate shrugged, still unconvinced she'd come to watch dragons, yet she found herself charmed by this unexpected level. Seeing her curiosity, Salvatore snapped his fingers. Instantly, a sleek bar materialized in the center of the floor, shelves stocked with every imaginable drink. Tea and water were free, everything else carried a charge. They accepted both gold galleons and Muggle currency. Ryan caught himself rolling his eyes. He was certain Salvatore earned a tidy commission on every sale. Before they could protest, Salvatore drifted off toward the staircase leading down to the 3rd floor, murmuring that he intended to rest in his coffin a while. "Just lay your coins or bills on the bar," he called over his shoulder. "The correct price will glow around them. Grab your drink, and the change will magically return to you." Left alone, Ryan sized up the rock wall. He'd never tried climbing in his previous life and wondered if Kate would take the lead. She glanced back at him, excitement flickering in her eyes. With a deep breath, Ryan stepped forward, determined to give it a try. The wall loomed before them, simple footholds beckoning. But the real ascent, he suspected, was as much about overcoming hesitation as it was about strength. Ryan had never considered rock climbing before. Outdoor climbs were dangerously unpredictable, and indoor walls cost money. Money a student like him simply didn't have. Now, however, he finally had his chance. Even without any special enhancements, his fitness was on par with a normal athlete, more than enough to give this a try. Woohoo! Across the way, Kate launched herself 10 meters up the artificial cliff, then somersaulted off the edge in a perfect backflip, landing lightly on a central safety bar. Her laughter rang out as she swung free for a moment, then dropped to the ground in a controlled fall. It was clear this facility wasn't just for climbing, it was built for thrill-seekers who wanted to leap and tumble from dizzying heights. No wonder they'd installed that bar in the middle, so daredevils like Kate wouldn't drop straight onto the padded floor below. By midday, her triumphant woohoo echoed again and again. 10 meters, 20 meters. She even conquered the full 100-meter rise, scaling the wall with the agility of a monkey and then diving off into another backflip. The sight of her carefree exuberance drew Ryan in. He couldn't resist, rieing for himself. Stepping up to the steep incline, he studied each handhold and foothold. His heart pounded as he began his ascent of the 100-meter wall on the right side of the arena. Below him, Kate, now sitting on a bench and sipping water, looked no bigger than a dark speck against the bright floor. Ryan reached 10 meters without incident, but when he glanced down, the ground had vanished from sight, swallowed by the height. A rush of adrenaline hit him, and he smiled up at the wall, determined to push higher. Ryan drifted amid a sea of white clouds, his hands damp against the cool mist. Boredom crept in. He'd long since shrugged off gravity's pull and had grown accustomed to the magic-formed cloud layers that floated forever out of reach for anyone else. Undeterred, he climbed on, striding upward through the shifting vapors until he reached the summit. There, suspended in midair, a wooden door slowly materialized. Ryan pressed his shoulder against it, swung it wide, and stepped onto the 5th and final floor. He closed the door behind him, stretched his arms out to the sides, and let himself fall backward, flat as a board. Whoosh, wind roared past his ears as he descended through the clouds. For a fleeting moment, he felt as though he'd landed in a bog, the squelch of mud under him, though he knew he was hurtling through thin air. The sensation was disorienting, as if he'd been lying on solid ground all along, and simply leapt from some impossible height. A wry thought crossed his mind. What if Neville had dared this same fall? Could it have sparked his magic early, sparing him the shame of being branded a squib? After all, Uncle Algy had tossed Neville into the Black Lake more times than anyone could count, nearly drowning him each time. It wasn't until the boy turned 8 that his magic finally surfaced. Only then did his family stop writing him off as a non-magical failure. It was mid-July, and summer was in full swing. Neville's birthday would fall on the 30th, just one day before Harry's and mine, who both share the 31st. Even as a newborn, Neville had shown unusual magical flair. The midwife swore she saw his blanket tighten itself around him, though no one else witnessed it, and she quietly credited his father for the trick. Neville's parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, never lived to see him grow. Shortly after his birth, they were tortured into madness by 4 Death Eaters wielding the Cruciatus curse. From that moment on, Neville was raised by his formidable grandmother, Augusta Longbottom. She loved her grandson fiercely, but loved her lost son, and his brilliant reputation, even more. By the time Neville could walk, she had already drilled into him that he must always be proud of his mother and father. "They gave their minds and health for you," she'd say in her sternest voice, "and you must never let anyone, least of all yourself, be ashamed of them." Yet pride under Augusta's roof came at a price. She admired Frank's prodigious talent and never tired of reminding Neville how he was a good boy, but not as gifted as your father. The comparisons stung, even as he tried his hardest to please her. When Neville was 8, his Uncle Algy paid a brief, ill-advised visit. For reasons none of the children ever understood, he slipped Neville's ankles through the railing of the second-floor window and dangled him there like a sack of potatoes, laughing all the while. It wasn't until a horrified housekeeper spotted them that Neville was freed, shaken, and terrified. That summer, as the days crept by toward his birthday, Neville carried the weight of his family's history on his thin shoulders, an unspoken promise to live up to parents he could barely remember, and a grandmother who expected nothing less than perfection. Yet for all Augusta's demands and Algy's cruelties, Neville clung to hope that once at Hogwarts, he might finally find a place where he belonged. Neville had barely wrapped his fingers around the fragile meringue Aunt Amy pressed into his palm when it slipped away. The confection shot into the air, bounced off the lawn, and flew right across the garden path, landing with a soft thud on the road beyond. Aunt Amy tutted in dismay, but Ryan only shook his head. "Pure-blood obsession with magic," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "At least wizards mend with a quick flick of a wand. You can't do that in Quidditch," he added wryly, recalling the bone-shattering falls that sport so often produced. He glanced over at Neville, who was dusting grass blades off his robes. The boy barely noticed. After his disastrous first 8 years, he'd grown remarkably resilient. Some cruelties run their course once you learn how to stand tall again. Ryan sighed, slipped away from the garden's edge, and made his way to the small wooden bar beneath the trellis. Kate followed shortly after, her cheeks still glowing from the afternoon's excitement. He poured her a steaming cup of black tea, and they settled onto the wrought-iron stools. "So," Ryan began, lifting his own cup, "when did you first realize you had magic?" Kate inhaled the rich aroma of her tea and polished off a sip before answering. "I must have been 5, she said, her dark eyes unfocused in memory. "I snuck up behind Father during dinner and cut off part of his beard." She smirked, then flushed slightly. He didn't even notice until his spoon hit his lips. He was so busy eating, he just chewed on it without complaint. Ryan blinked. "You're kidding," she giggled. "No joke. It's pride of the family, really." She set her cup on the bar. "We're vampire hunters. My ancestors ran a whole clan devoted to it." He raised an eyebrow. "Vampire hunters?" Kate nodded gravely. "Those were dangerous times. We learned to fight at dawn, track at dusk." She paused, folding her hands around the teacup. "That's why I'm proud of my first spell. If I can sneak a snip in front of my father without him noticing, I can do just about anything." Ryan leaned forward, intrigued. "And the rest of your family? What did they do, besides beard snipping and vampire slaying?" Kate's eyes gleamed. "That's a story for another cup of tea." She grinned, and Ryan realized he would be hearing it for hours. Ryan leaned forward, curiosity bright in his eyes. "Vampire hunters? Who are they?" Kate shook her head, perplexed. "Vampire hunters? I've never heard of any, only half vampires, and even that's rare. Besides, our family are wizards. Why would we need to hunt vampires? We don't have to worry about food, clothing, or shelter. Magic handles all of that." Ryan flushed with embarrassment. Of course, wizards lived in an entirely different world from muggles. A flick of the wand could repair ripped robes, summon dinner, or conjure a carriage for the evening. Bills, jobs, even basic necessities didn't exist the way they did in the non-magical world. It was no wonder the Ministry of Magic often felt superfluous. Few families were more respected than those with long-standing wizarding lineages, like Ollivander's. Time slipped away in the warmth of their conversation, and before they realized it, the dinner bell chimed through the corridors, calling them to the table. Chapter 45. Raising Dragons for Fun and Profit. A gentle choral melody drifted through the dining hall as guests gathered for dinner. The music, an otherworldly weave of pure, feminine voices, lent the room a reverent, almost magical atmosphere. Kate, perspiring from the evening's warmth, slipped into the small restroom in the lounge behind the auditorium on the first floor to freshen up before taking her seat. Tonight's spread was a celebration of hearty Romanian fare. First came tender potato braised beef, followed by a steaming bowl of beef tripe soup. The tripe had been slowly cooked in a garlicky broth, swirled with sour cream and laced with hot peppers. Kate took one taste and felt her face flush. She downed cup after cup of black tea in a desperate bid to tame the fiery afterburn. Next on the table was roasted stuffed pumpkin, a hollowed-out gourd filled with a savory mixture of ground beef or turkey, rice, onions, and a blend of fresh herbs and spices. The whole dish was crowned with a thick layer of cool sour cream, its creamy tang perfectly offsetting the pumpkin's natural sweetness. Then came the cornmeal-crusted lamb, so generously salted that its flavor reminded Kate of a spicy kimchi. The lamb's crust crackled under her knife, giving way to succulent meat that was rich, bold, and deeply satisfying. At first, Ryan had resisted the mound of rice set before him, but under gentle encouragement, he finally scooped a generous helping onto his plate. As he tasted the combination, row after row of roasted pumpkin, fiery tripe, and hearty lamb cushioned on fluffy rice, it dawned on him why Romanian cuisine so often charms visitors from the East. Its robust, homey flavors shared a kinship with the comfort foods of their own childhood, making every bite feel both novel and strangely familiar. By the meal's end, Kate and Ryan sat back, pleasantly sated and already anticipating tomorrow night's feast. Romanian cooking, with its generous portions and bold seasonings, had proven itself a worthy contender for their palates and perhaps for their next culinary adventure. After dinner, Ryan and Kate strolled down the corridor to the lounge just behind the auditorium. Its decor echoed the vampire carriage's opulence, rich velvet drapes, polished ebony wood, ornate carvings, but on a grander scale. Plush sofas and low tables invited relaxation, and a guest bathroom opened directly onto the indoor pool and hot spring complex. Down the hall, they found a bedroom furnished with a comfortable double bed instead of the coffin Ryan had half expected. Ryan rinsed off and, wary of his own budding powers, decided to skip his usual meditation. He didn't want to risk unconsciously radiating charm, and heaven forbid, losing his virginity by accident. With Kate's even breathing filling the quiet room, he drifted into an untroubled sleep. Morning came softly, sunlight pouring through the tall windows. Today's agenda was simple: explore the 5th floor's panoramic lookout, then gather at 6 for the rooftop airlift. Because the chopper would touch down atop the castle, Uriel had temporarily dispelled the rooftop weather ward, clear skies only, so the pilot could see their landing pad. Meanwhile, Salvatore, sensitive to daylight, preferred to remain on the 3rd floor, where he was absorbed in his latest experiment. He helped usher Ryan and the others up to the 4th floor with a warm but discreet farewell. From there, a wide staircase led to the 5th floor, where another lounge and bath facilities awaited them. Stepping onto the castle's roof terrace, Ryan's breath caught. A massive parasol shaded a long table heaped with fresh fruits, artisan breads, delicate pastries, smoked meats, and steaming pots of tea. All meals today would be served al fresco. To the right, a sleek bathroom and a smaller, cozy lounge offered shaded respite. Ryan sank into a chair, inhaled the crisp air, and smiled. With such a view and such hospitality, the day promised to be unforgettable. Dinner would be served aboard the evening transport. For now, Ryan and Kay sipped black tea while lounging on deck chairs beneath a striped parasol, feeling as relaxed as if they'd been whisked off to a seaside resort. Only, instead of an ocean, their view stretched out into a vast tapestry of treetops, and every so often, the deep-throated roar of dragons echoed in the distance. Perched on the small table between them was a panoramic telescope, identical to the models sold at the 4th Quidditch World Cup, capable of capturing live action and replaying it in slow motion. Through its lenses, the forest canopy looked endless, but Ryan knew this woodland was merely a facade. Adult Romanian longhorn dragons grow up to 40 feet, 12 meters long. The dense undergrowth would be an impossible barrier for creatures of that size. Beneath the trees, concealed by powerful magic, lay an immense subterranean sanctuary, an underground refuge constructed by the Romanian Ministry of Magic, reminiscent of the Great Hollow Forest from the old Bleach anime. Here, the dragons could roam freely, sheltered from Muggle discovery and protected from the elements. Yet the dragons did not remain below indefinitely. Far off in the distance, where the sea of green gave way to a narrow canyon, a hidden exit allowed shafts of sunlight to penetrate the underground realm. Shielded by enchantments that kept Muggles blind to its presence, this canyon served as both a sunlit clearing and a hunting ground, stocked with cattle and sheep for the dragons to pursue when they emerged from their bowels of earth. As Ryan adjusted the telescope's focus, he waited eagerly for the next distant roar, or the glint of massive wings breaking through the trees. Kate stared at Ryan in disbelief. "So we're not actually here to watch dragons emerge from the canyon?" Ryan shook his head. "Nope, that wasn't part of the tour package, and it wouldn't cost us a penny extra. Besides," he added with a grin, "it gives our vampire friend an excuse to rest for a while." Kate hesitated. "I almost wanted to go down there." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Forget it. Let's just head up to the 4th floor later and find something more entertaining to do." With that, she stood abruptly, then plopped back onto the bench, clearly at a loss. Ryan rummaged in his jacket pocket and produced a slightly dog-eared book titled Raising Dragons for Fun and Profit. Hagrid called this a tad outdated, but I figured it might still be useful. He handed it to Kate. She glanced at the cover. Reading wasn't exactly her pastime, but she'd watched Ryan pore over his books for weeks. After a moment, he nudged her. "So, find anything interesting?" Kate looked up, puzzled. "Profitable dragons?" she echoed. "Well, I guess it's not wrong." Ryan flipped to a bookmarked page and peered over his glasses. "Did you notice that before the 1709 Wizarding Conclave outlawed dragon breeding, keeping dragons was actually quite common?" Kate's eyes widened as she scanned the lines. "Right. And after the ban, things like dragon hide and blood shot up in price." She tapped the page thoughtfully, the wheels in her mind already turning. "Yes, back then, raising dragons was about as common for wizards as raising cattle and sheep," Ryan said, leaning forward. "Wizards don't need gold coins for everyday expenses, but some rare reagents and specialized tools still require currency. So dragon husbandry became a lucrative business. Dragons live for centuries, and you can harvest a little skin or blood now and then without harming them, so their value just keeps growing." Kate nodded. "I've noticed, Ryan. You can't get by in the magical world without dragons. Their scales go into potions, their hides become enchanted robes, and their hearts even power certain wands." Ryan smiled. "Exactly. That's also why the Ministry of Magic and the major dragon breeding guilds crack down on independent breeders. Dragons are far too useful and far too dangerous to let every amateur keep one in their backyard." Kate raised an eyebrow. "But private dragon farms have been around for decades. Nobody's been hurt." "That's precisely the problem," Ryan replied. "Imagine 100,000 wizards, each with their own dragon roost. Who would manage them? How would the ministry enforce regulations? Dragons aren't pets. They're powerful, potentially hostile creatures. The risk of a rogue dragon, let alone hundreds of them, running amok is unacceptable." Kate sighed. "So that's why the old guide, Raising Dragons for Fun and Profit, is obsolete. Private dragon rearing is officially banned." "Right," Ryan said, nodding. "If you want to work with dragons now, you have to go through an approved guild or the ministry's own breeding program. No more lone breeders." Ryan leaned over the dusty parchment spread out between them and pointed to a carefully drawn line of text. "Kate, have you ever heard of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy? Sometimes it's just called the Statute of Secrecy. It was negotiated by the International Confederation of Wizards in 1689 and formally enacted in 1692. Kate frowned in concentration. "That's the law designed to keep our world hidden from muggles, right?" "Exactly," Ryan said. "Its purpose was, and still is, to shield every corner of the wizarding world from being exposed. Think about it. Dragons are enormous creatures, impossible to conceal. Even raising them in private carries the risk of a muggle sighting. That's why wealthy witches and wizards build their castles in remote areas, then weave powerful protective enchantments around them." Kate tapped her finger on a muggle world map pinned to the wall. "I've always wondered why muggle maps seem so incomplete. Large swaths of land are just blank or labeled unknown territory." Ryan nodded. "Those blank spaces aren't mistakes. They're deliberate omissions. When the statute was put in place, entire regions were erased from public cartography to keep magical communities hidden. It's why you'll never find Hogwarts on any muggle globe." Kate leaned back, absorbing the gravity of it all. "But what drove wizards to such lengths? Why the statute in the first place?" A thoughtful smile crossed Ryan's face. "Have you ever heard of Gryffindor's most famous resident ghost?" Kate's eyes lit up. "Nearly Headless Nick." "Right," Ryan said. "Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington. His story goes back to the 15th century, when witch hunts and anti-magic sentiment swept across Europe. Witches and wizards were persecuted, tortured, even executed. Magical communities realized that if they didn't stay hidden, they'd face the same fate." He sighed. "That brutality led our ancestors to negotiate the statute, to draw a line between our world and theirs, ensuring both could coexist." Kate traced Nick's regal silhouette on the parchment. "It's sobering to think how much was sacrificed, how many lives were at risk, just so we could live in peace, unseen." Ryan folded the parchment carefully. peace maintained by secrecy, and sometimes by a nearly headless head. He grinned, and Kate laughed, both aware of the fragile balance that kept their world safe. Many witches and wizards have been imprisoned, and even sentenced to death, simply for practicing magic, Ryan said gravely. Take nearly headless Nick, for example. He lost his wand, couldn't defend himself, and was ultimately executed. Wizarding families live in constant fear of losing their children. Young magic users often fail to control their powers, inadvertently attracting Muggle hunters against whom they stand no chance. Even now, decades after the Protective Act was passed, Dumbledore's sister still endures persecution at the hands of Muggles, utterly powerless to stop them. Kate sighed. All the more reason the Protective Act is indispensable. Ryan nodded inwardly. The law may have saved countless lives, but it's long overdue for an update. An age of instant communication is dawning, and the statutes must evolve to match. Chapter 46, Unreceived Letters. Kate lingered over her book for a while longer, but when no dragons appeared, she gave up and made her way to the 4th floor to dance. Ryan, meanwhile, dropped into a chair with his legs splayed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped under his chin, adopting the meditative posture of Bu Jingyun from the old Fengyun tales. He stared off into the distance, replaying their earlier conversation. The wizarding world, he thought, had gone terribly off course. Back then, people lacked true insight. Wizards should have sought out more alliances with the upper echelons, just as that portly Hufflepuff monk who nearly became Pope. Even Draco Malfoy, notorious for his disdain of Muggles, had outmaneuvered most of his peers. The Malfoys, with their vast wealth and influence, had been among the fiercest opponents of the Statute of Secrecy. Though they maintained that purebloods were superior to non-magical folk, they prized money and social standing above all else. In their eyes, a wealthy Muggle could be just as noble as any wizard, whereas poor Muggles, they believed, were a wholly different breed. Throughout history, witches and wizards forged close ties with the noble echelons of the non-magical world. Countless Muggle treasures and works of art came into magical hands with the backing of royal patrons like William the Conqueror and Queen Elizabeth I. The Statute of Secrecy, however, proved to be a one-size-fits-all solution, blind to the differing needs of various countries and to the disparate standings of individual wizards. Under Malfoy's leadership, true integration between the two worlds might have been possible. Had he reformed magical education and shaped public opinion, the barriers between wizard and Muggle could have crumbled. Instead, aside from a handful of wealthy, high-profile families, most witches and wizards withdrew from urban centers altogether. Using confusion charms, they cloaked themselves in remote villages and formed their own tight-knit communities. Places such as Dingworth in Cornwall, Upper Flagley in Yorkshire, Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon, and Godric's Hollow in southwest England became some of the most celebrated semi-magical settlements. Of these, Dingworth is perhaps best known today, partly because Fleur and Bill Weasley's Shell Cottage perches right on the shoreline just beyond the village. Elves are the most common magical creatures around here. Take Gilderoy Lockhart, for example. He once rounded up a troop of them to serve as assistants in his defense against the dark arts class. Although a simple containment spell can keep an elf in check, they still managed to turn his lessons into utter chaos. Wizards' histories are equally dramatic. In the 17th century, a witch named Divna Firmigi was holidaying in Cornwall when a large band of elves snatched her away. The experience scarred her so deeply that she spent the rest of her life lobbying the Ministry of Magic to exterminate every elf humanely. Her campaign became infamous, immortalized, along with countless other absurdities, in the annals of magical history. Whenever Ryan thought about that episode, he felt a surge of irritation he couldn't quite explain. That's the trouble with the wizarding world. They insist everything, your appearance, your personality, even your likes and dislikes, is etched in your very blood. Rumor has it that if Harry Potter had been born a girl, Severus Snape would never have treated him so harshly. But Harry isn't just any child, he's a carbon copy of his father, James Potter. Even if fate had made him female, he'd still carry James's spirit, his mannerisms, his arrogance. No wonder Snape either wants to scrub Harry from his mind or see him utterly erased. Ryan paused to reconsider his story. If he wanted to introduce a gender swap twist, Ron would be the obvious choice, while Harry himself would inevitably end up surrounded by an unlikely harem. Beyond that, Harry's tragic childhood could easily be tied to the uncanny resemblance he bears to his father. After all, Harry's dad once encountered the Vernons and left such a terrible impression that his sister-in-law now thinks he murdered her sibling. Of course, in a world of magic, outward appearances aren't set in stone. A blessing here, an enchantment there, and a wizard's features can change entirely. Take Voldemort's mother, for instance. Though crippled by self-doubt, she was born with formidable power. In her final moments, she passed a last blessing on her child. Yet in spite of that gift, Voldemort grew up looking every bit like his Muggle father, Tom Riddle Sr. How does that happen? How does a boy endowed with magic lose his mother's protective charm and end up a mirror image of the man who abandoned him? Ryan shook his head, bemused by the convoluted tangent. He rubbed his forehead, banishing the wild notions that had suddenly taken hold. Then again, he muttered, lifting his teacup, if I really wanted to, I could just invent a gender swap potion or spell. He took a deliberate sip of tea, extinguishing the last flicker of mischief in his mind. When he'd set out on this journey, he'd been bracing himself for an encounter with bloodthirsty vampires raising human cattle in secret. In the end, though, it was his own courage and Kate's high-pitched screams that carried him safely through. Ryan's second day at the castle went completely off script. While Kate was locked in combat with the vampire, he slipped away to cast a scanning spell over every corridor, room, and corner of the fortress, including the vampire's private chambers. He found nothing but a few blood-stained lollipops, spilled ink, and scattered manuscripts and letters. Even the elusive wizard responsible for stealing the dragon eggs and unleashing the fledgling dragons into the skies remained conspicuously absent. The whole expedition felt oddly ordinary. Not unenjoyable, exactly, but so uneventful that Ryan began to wonder if he was really the story's hero. Meanwhile, a new worry took hold. Penelope still hadn't sent a letter in 2 days. It wasn't for lack of an address. Magical owls routinely deliver mail without one. Unless someone deliberately wards themselves with repulsion, camouflage, or shielding charms, an owl's innate magic assures it finds the intended recipient. From his own investigations, Ryan knew this uncanny homing instinct originated in Athena, a long-dead archmage revered almost as a deity. The bird's lithe forms and intricate plumage spoke to the same arcane aesthetics wielded by wizards of old. And yet, if even these mystical messengers couldn't reach Penelope, Ryan had to wonder, what had she become shielded against, intentionally or otherwise, and how would he ever get her the answer she was waiting for? Though the original protector has long since passed, his blessing endures and even grows stronger with each generation. In stark contrast, the humble pig remains stubbornly unmagical. Biologically, these creatures are our closest genetic cousins in the animal kingdom, so much so that some researchers speculate gene-edited pig organs might one day be suitable for human transplant. Yet magic flatly rejects them, deeming their form too crude and unworthy of enchantment. Over centuries, the wizarding world itself has evolved almost like a living organism. Though magic has no will of its own, it reflects the collective aesthetic and moral vision of those who wield it. This principle is precisely why Ryan chose pigs for his experiments. By performing a rare ritual, he could transform ordinary pig hide into a material nearly indistinguishable from dragon's skin, granting it strength and resilience that defy its humble origin. You might wonder, too, why Sirius managed to slip past the owls in Part 3. The answer is that an owl's tracking magic isn't entirely its own, and wizards have long agreed it cannot be coerced into malicious service. Should you attempt to order an owl to capture a fugitive, you'll find its magic will simply refuse to comply. Of course, you can still dispatch a letter laced with a subtle charm, or send a shouting letter to demand someone's immediate attention, but true pursuit? That remains beyond the reach of any enchanted bird. With these revelations noted, our story's next chapter unfolds beyond this page. Turn to the following section to continue. It works much the same way that ordinary house elves cannot harm a witch or wizard, even though they possess strong magic of their own. Take Dobby, for example. Despite his best intentions, and even with an entire army of house elves at his back, his magic remains carefully constrained. In the same vein, the Smith family carries a built-in protective ward, almost like a family curse, that keeps unwanted magic at bay. This ward is still active, even though Ryan's powers have warped over the years. The proof is the little stone tower tucked into the canyon just beyond Smith Castle. Built as an alchemical relay station, it weakens the family's natural anti-mail effect, allowing owls to drop off letters addressed to Smith household members. The birds navigate here simply by homing in on the Smith name. If Ryan's shielding ability had ever faded, the tower would have ceased to work long ago. Kate's talent, by contrast, mirrors that same family magic, but functions as an active skill. When she focuses, she can render herself nearly invisible, slipping past guards and wards alike. Whereas the Smith's passive ward even blocks benign spells, curing charms or enchanted letters alike, Kate's gift demands effort and concentration. Only by channeling her own power can she vanish from sight. Kate remained at Ryan's side, resolute. In fact, just as he pressed a hand against his belly, Ryan had even so far as to temporarily transfer the tower's naming rights to her, a gesture that spoke volumes about her place in his life. All the same, the letter that should have reached them long ago is nowhere to be seen, and its delay only deepens the mystery. Chapter 47, Journey in the Dragon's Belly. Ryan paced in front of the Gryffindor common room fireplace, glancing at the portrait hole every few seconds. 2 days had passed since summer's end, and still no letter from Penelope. Ordinarily, he'd never miss an owl in the mail. Too many letters were a nuisance after all. But now, the absence of even a single parchment sent his mind spinning. Back in the original tale, Percy Weasley had written to Penelope every day all summer, even splurging on a private owl to carry his love notes. Was she testing him the same way? If so, why was Kate, Penelope's closest friend, completely unfazed? From the spiral staircase above, Kate appeared, wrapped in a towel, droplets of water sparkling on her short hair. She spotted Ryan's anxious expression and sat down beside him. "Waiting for Penny's reply?" she asked, a teasing lilt to her voice. Ryan winced. "Me? No, it's you who seems to care more." She waved a hand. "Fine, but remember, Penelope's on a family trip, Muggle style. They crossed the channel last night aboard the Dragon's Belly." He froze. "Dragon's Belly?" Kate grinned. "It's what everyone's calling that new ferry from Dover to Calais. No portkeys, no apparition, just a regular ship. They won't dock until tomorrow morning." Ryan frowned. "She could have apparated." "She insisted on doing it the old-fashioned way," Kate replied, smoothing back her hair. "No magic allowed on this vacation." He managed a small smile, though his heart still fluttered. Penelope was halfway across the water in the Dragon's Belly, and here he was, pacing the common room. All he could do now was wait, and hope that her next letter would be worth it. Kate's eyes flickered with unease as she set down her spoon. "Penelope should be in France today," she said in a tone that sounded anything but casual. Ryan paused mid-bite. He couldn't pinpoint why, but something about Kate's delivery felt off. Still, no alarm bells rang in his mind, so he offered nothing more. Lunch was a near mirror of last night's fare. Same bread, same stew, save for one odd addition, a tart lemon broth studded with beef and rice meatballs. Yesterday, he'd been intrigued by the exotic spices, but on second tasting, the combination struck him as awkward, too puckering, too heavy. He pushed his bowl aside and nursed a glass of water, longing for something simple. The afternoon slipped by in a blur of dull errands. Every so often, Kate would freeze, her eyes wide, insisting she'd spotted 2 golden horns glinting in the distance. Each time Ryan rushed to the window, of course, there was nothing but empty sky. He teased her gently. "Maybe you're imagining things." Then, just as dusk began to soften the light, Kate leapt up again. "Ryan, look!" he groaned good-naturedly. "Another dragon sighting?" She pointed to a tiny black speck drifting toward them against the fading blue. "No, this is new. Some kind of transport. A dragon, maybe?" Ryan folded his arms, smirking. "But you said you hate dragons? Are you trying to starve us into submission?" Kate's lips curved into a triumphant grin. "Trust me," she said. "You'll want to see this." A massive shape swooped toward them, horns gleaming like polished gold against black and green scales, the unmistakable silhouette of a Romanian longhorn dragon. Yet as they drew closer, Ryan made out seams of metal and the hum of machinery. It was no living beast, but a dragon-shaped flying machine. Unlike Britain's strict rules governing broomsticks, Romania welcomes a dazzling variety of airborne contraptions: flying brooms, magic carpets, motorcycles, even Muggle-style airplanes. So a dragon-styled craft was perfectly legal. Still, it struck Ryan as odd that no concealment charm, nothing like the night bus's invisibility, had been used. Muggles on the streets could watch this mechanical behemoth swoop over them without a second glance. The dragon machine settled behind the castle, its enormous tail stirring gusts that rattled windows on the 5th floor. Then the craft's jaw-like hatch opened, and a frail wizard clambered out. With a polite nod, he confirmed their luggage was stowed and beckoned them aboard. He followed with a lengthy spiel, outlining the perils and marvels of the journey they were about to undertake. "Ryan, this is incredible," Kate exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement. "It may not be a real dragon, but we're going inside it." Like a wild stallion given its head, she bounded forward, eager to explore every gleaming scale of their extraordinary ride. It was utterly fascinating. From the moment we boarded, I knew this transportation system was less about efficient travel and more about orchestrating an unforgettable spectacle. Every sign along the way hyped the free viewing of the Romanian longhorn dragon, ratcheting our expectations to the breaking point. And just when we were primed for the real deal, the dragon, apparently in a foul mood, vanished. In its stead appeared a life-size flying prop shaped like the vivid beast we'd been promised. Talk about a bait-and-switch. Salvatore, the vampire, had deliberately kept us here for a full day, not to prevent our escape, but to maximize our anticipation. I have to admit, they pulled it off brilliantly. The entrance alone was enough to unsettle any sane person. We stepped into a cavernous maw rimmed with towering fangs and a slick, drooling tongue that clung to our boots like genuine dragon saliva. Each footfall was a slimy reminder of what we were supposed to believe we'd be witnessing. We pressed forward, guided by the faint thrum of breath, or what felt like breath, against our cheeks as the prop's inflated wings pulsed overhead. Finally, we reached the head, where the throat met the skull. There, a long, dark tunnel yawned beneath us, utterly void of sound. Kate's voice, which would normally be echoing along the corridor, disappeared entirely in that unearthly quiet. The soundproofing was disconcertingly thorough. The slender wizard approached and gave a polite bow. "Mr. Ryan, the front cabin is at the Dragon's Head. You and Miss Kate will be quartered in the belly. We should arrive by tomorrow morning, and you'll be awakened by music when we land." With that, he lifted his wand and gently tapped the small fleshy protuberance at his throat. Instantly, a hidden panel in the roof of the dragon's mouth swung open. The wizard slipped through, and moments later, Ryan followed suit, stepping onto a smooth, downward chute carved inside the creature's gullet. As he descended, he could feel the faint pulse of enchantment woven into the living walls. It was clearly a slide spell, an ancient charm dating back at least to the Middle Ages, one that famously helped Hermione Granger spirit herself, Harry, and Ron safely out of Hogwarts during the final battle. This dragon's throat wasn't particularly long or winding, so logically he should have reached the belly almost immediately. But the slide carried on for nearly a full minute before the darkness ahead began to brighten. When the glow finally returned, Ryan realized with astonishment that he'd just ridden a magical slide all the way through the dragon's mouth, right into its cavernous underbelly. I stepped onto a yielding, flesh-colored floor that felt disturbingly soft underfoot. The chamber we'd entered was far more spacious than the last carriage, its decor unsettlingly organic, walls rippling with vein-like ridges as if I'd wandered into a dragon's innards. "Ryan, come look!" Kate's voice rang out from a plush sofa shaped like a giant heart, upholstered in deep crimson velvet. Before her stood a low table groaning under an array of steaming bowls and plates. A leather-bound menu in ornate script promised red braised dragon meat, white scalded dragon tendons, black pepper dragon steak, curried dragon hind legs, stew noodles tangled with tender dragon cuts. Eating dragon meat inside a dragon's belly. Talk about immersive dining. Kate lifted a forkful of noodles to her lips. "They use a purification spell to strip away all toxins," she explained, slurping a silky steam. "Rand, it's a Romanian wizarding specialty, and astonishingly, it's cheaper than pork." Of course, the ministry strictly regulates all dragon products, so only licensed local eateries may serve it. I hesitated at the heart-shaped sofa's edge. Kate caught my glance and laughed, noodles dangling. I almost didn't dare sit, she admitted, pressing a fingertip into the velvet. It really does feel like a beating heart. She stabbed another chunk of dragon meat, eyes alight. Come on, Ryan, you have to try it. This broth tastes like, well, the dragon's own life force. I swallowed hard, curiosity overcoming my hesitation. After all, how often does one get to dine inside a dragon? Ryan sank into the sofa and was surprised at how indistinguishable it felt from any ordinary couch. A one-way window ran along its side, offering fleeting glimpses of the world rushing by beneath them. Clearly, the cabin was airborne, yet its interior remained as flat and unremarkable as ever. Still, the decor had gradually grown more tasteful, so much so that Ryan wondered whether his sense of style had been permanently warped. He couldn't help but recall his previous life when he'd pursued Kamen Rider X-Aid. Back then, the show had looked like trash at first glance, only to turn out surprisingly satisfying once you got used to it. The memory shifted to the dragon meat he'd sampled on this trip. Everyone claimed dragon tasted like chicken, and in a sense they were right. After all, chickens evolved from dinosaurs, and dragons were just oversized, mythical dinosaurs. But the reality was closer to turkey, coarser, gamier, far from the bland familiarity of chicken. No wonder dragon meat hadn't caught on in other countries. Even with strict regulations, he thought, if dragon really were that delicious, people elsewhere would find a way to eat it. Chapter 48, The Patronus Spell. After a simple dinner, Ryan flopped onto the sofa, closed his eyes, and let the pleasant post-meal quiet wash over him. There was something wonderfully calming about doing absolutely nothing. Ryan, what's our next stop? Kate asked, tossing her comic book aside and perching on the armrest. Ryan cracked one eye open. The zombie trail. Kate's brow shot up. The zombie trail? Seriously? You know I'm not into horror tours. It's one of Wakatu's most famous attractions, Ryan replied with a grin. Come on, it'll be fun. Kate scrunched her nose in disgust. Zombies are just gross. Gray skin, rotting flesh, that horrible smell. Vampires at least have some style. Technically, Ryan teased, they're just animated corpses. Kate threw her head back and sighed. She'd secretly hoped their next destination would be something less undead. Are you sure this is even in Africa? I thought zombies were a Southern American legend. I once read a traveler's journal. He always wore a turban, claiming he saw zombie-like creatures in a remote West African village, Ryan said. Whether it's true or just superstition, it's worth checking out. Kate narrowed her eyes and folded her arms. Fine, but if I come back smelling like decay, I'm blaming you. Ryan laughed and sat up. Deal. Now rest your eyes. We've got an early start tomorrow. As Kate reluctantly closed her comic and opened her mind to the unexpected, neither of them suspected how very real and very dangerous the zombie trail would turn out to be. Ryan adjusted his turban with a rueful smile. This, he said, was actually a gift from an African prince. He sent it to thank me for helping him get rid of the local zombies. He shook his head. No wonder Quirrell glossed over zombie lore in the original book. He must have made it up on the spot. And, of course, this is my first real error, and I've managed to pull it off in front of you, Professor Kate. To his surprise, Kate's lips curled into a bright grin. Well then, she said, leaning forward as if about to impart a secret, let me properly introduce you to zombies. She began without skipping a beat. The most infamous zombies hail from Haiti, thanks to voodoo wizards. Like a basilisk, a zombie is a magically animated corpse, created and bound by enchantment. Locally, they're employed as unpaid labor. Any wizard who knows the proper incantations can command them. Kate tapped her temple. At one point, there was even a craze for upgrading zombies into inferi. Unlike zombies, inferi require a death, usually murder, to exist, and their bodies can be old. But zombies are different. The corpse must be freshly deceased. Once you have a recently disturbed grave and the right local magic, the body reanimates and obeys its summoner. She held up a finger for emphasis. Of course, they share classic undead vulnerabilities. Sunlight weakens them, and fire will destroy them completely. Finally, Kate nodded as if concluding a lecture. Your most reliable defense, though? The Patronus charm. It works wonders against these creatures. Ryan threw back his head and laughed. Kate, you've got it all wrong. Summoning a Patronus eats up an enormous amount of mana. Even if it might work on zombies, a good, roaring fire spell will always outperform the Patronus charm. But isn't the Patronus way cooler? Kate crossed her arms and turned away, lips in a pout. Using a Patronus against mindless undead is like employing the killing curse to swat mosquitoes, Ryan replied with a grin. Its true purpose is to drive away creatures like Dementors, or the darkest of wizards. It also serves as a rough gauge of a caster's moral fiber. I know that, Kate snapped. Only a pure wizard can manage it. Didn't the infamous dark wizard Ratchetian try? He botched his Patronus so badly that maggots exploded from his wand and consumed him. That's actually a legend, Ryan said, shaking his head. Arrogant or hot-tempered wizards can and do produce full-bodied Patronuses all the time. It's far from a foolproof testo. F goodness. Still, Kate countered, anyone who can conjure a corporeal Patronus, most Aurors, senior Wizengamot members, top ministry officials, wears it like a badge of honor. Sure, Ryan agreed. It's a flashy status symbol. But out here, facing a wave of zombies, give me a Phoenix Fire spell every time. It's cheap, it's reliable, and it gets the job done faster than chasing after a silver stag. Even the darkest person still carries soft, happy memories somewhere inside them, sometimes even because of the very misdeeds that earned them their evil reputation. They don't see themselves as hopelessly wicked. To them, they're still noble, accomplished wizards capable of great things. That means, in theory, they could cast a Patronus. Take the Death Eaters who revel in summoning Dementors, Ryan continued. If they were to turn the spell on themselves, they'd be forced to confront their own shame and cruelty. They'd realize just how empty and contemptible their lives have become, how few true, joyful memories they actually have. Kate raised an eyebrow. Okay, but what does any of this have to do with occlumency? Ryan glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. Of course she'd catch on. Ravenclaws always did. Harry and Ron looked sheepish. They'd never bothered to pick up extra reading, and not surprisingly, didn't know much beyond the basics of the magic they learned in their 5th year. Occlumency is the art of closing off your mind, Ryan explained. A skilled occlumens can block out unwanted emotions and mental intrusions. If a dark wizard has built a deep enough barrier against their own destructive thoughts, they can peel it back, selectively discard the guilt, the hatred, the self-loathing, and instead access the small, pure spark of happiness they've buried inside. That spark, however faint, is exactly what fuels the Patronus. He paused, letting that sink in. Remember Severus Snape? He's the only Death Eater in the original books who can produce a Patronus, and he does it for one reason, love for Lily. It proves that, no matter how far you've fallen, if you can master your mind and cling to a single positive memory, you still have a shot at hope. If Lucius Malfoy really mastered that magic, he could use it sparingly, without vomiting maggots all over the place. No dark wizard dares attempt it. It's tantamount to suicide. Even Dolores Umbridge can conjure a cat-shaped Patronus. That garish pink toad ended up senior undersecretary, almost certainly because of her ability to produce a Patronus. In the wizarding world, the charm is a kind of invaluable credential, and not surprisingly, most who learn it end up on the side of good. Wait, bad guys can't cast it? Kate's voice flared with indignation. It's such a brilliant spell. Why would dark wizards be barred from using it? I want to be like Andros, she went on. He can summon a Patronus without even raising his wand, and he once blew up a giant. Ryan, you're not impressing anyone, Kate muttered, puffing out her cheeks. He's not wrong, Ryan said gently, taking her little hand. To qualify for the Wizengamot, or any senior ministry post, you either need top-tier mental defenses, the kind of psychopathic self-hypnosis that lets you block out inner darkness, or a reputation so villainous that no one suspects you'd ever cast a Patronus. Kate let out a long, bored sigh. She stretched out across Ryan's lap, grabbed the comic book lying beside her, and buried her nose in it. Sure, whatever you say, she murmured, flipping through the pages. Ryan leaned over Kate's shoulder and began reading the little picture book with genuine curiosity. Honestly, it fell far short of the adventures of Mad Muggle Martin Miggs, the irresistible tale of that pint-sized wizard who dropped out of Hogwarts and set off on a whirlwind tour of the world. Ryan found himself wondering if George and Fred had ever read this story. Otherwise, why else would they have quit school so soon? Sure, Dolores Umbridge's meddling had driven them to their breaking point, but based on very thing the twins got up to, Ryan was certain their escape had been planned long before she stuck her nose in. Some folks even whispered that Newt Scamander might be the real author, a way of commemorating his own aborted Hogwarts career and the epoch-spanning adventures that left him persona non grata in several magical governments. In reality, though, the credited writer was a complete unknown, someone who'd never appeared in any official record. "It's dreadfully dull," Ryan declared, closing the book with a small thud. "I'd rather ride a dragon across the sky than trudge through another one of these dreary tales." Kate chuckled as she took back the book. Together, they braced themselves for whatever yawn-inducing passage lay ahead, and silently vowed to hunt down something more exciting on their next visit to the library. Chapter 49. Classification of Spells. The world outside the carriage window blurred as the late-night train sped onward. Despite the hour and perhaps fueled by the dragon steak they'd devoured earlier, Ryan and Kate were still buzzing with energy. "Wait a second," Ryan said, leaning over Kate's shoulder and pointing at his glowing tablet. "Did the author do this on purpose, or is he just clueless?" Kate rubbed her eyes but stayed upright. "What's up?" Ryan tapped the screen. "He calls it the Horn Curse, but that's clearly a hex, specifically a poisoning curse. At the very least, he should have labeled it a spell, not a jinx." Kate raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that splitting hairs? A curse is just another kind of spell. Why not call everything a spell and be done with it?" "There's a reason for the distinction," Ryan said. "Terms like jinx, hex, and curse aren't interchangeable. A jinx is a minor nuisance, a hex inflicts genuine harm, often poison, and a curse is even more potent. If you lump them all under one heading, you lose precision." Kate crossed her arms. "Seems nitpicky. To me, magic is magic." Ryan couldn't suppress a small smile. He actually agreed with her general point. In his own wizarding interface, every magical effect showed up simply as a spell. Yet even he recognized that conventional wizarding schools kept charms, jinxes, hexes, curses, and transfiguration in separate categories. Without his advanced plugin, you'd have to learn those distinctions to pass any formal curriculum. "There's structure to it," he replied, "especially once you advance to higher-level work. Even transfiguration stands alone as its own discipline. Authors need to get their taxonomy right if they want readers who know magic to stay immersed." Kate yawned, finally succumbing to sleepiness. "As long as it makes the story better?" she mumbled, drifting off. Ryan set the tablet aside. The train rattled through the night toward its destination, and the two friends settled into companionable silence, already discussing in their dreams which spell category they'd master next. Ryan glanced around the empty classroom, just him and Kate, with no enchanted monitoring devices active, and lowered his voice. "Kate, these labels aren't arbitrary. Each name represents a different risk level and magical principle." He waved a hand, organizing his thoughts. "If you only look at broad function, you might sort spells into defensive, offensive, or restorative categories, but that misses the nuances. In reality, there are 7 distinct branches of magic." He counted them off on his fingers. 1. Transfiguration. This alters an object's shape or appearance. Take the Avis spell. It doesn't summon real birds, but causes birds to burst forth from your wand tip. 2. Charms. Charms tweak an object's inherent properties, producing effects like levitation or protection. That's why Professor Flitwick is officially the charms master, not the spells teacher. His focus is on changing qualities, light, sound, force, rather than outright transformation. 3. Jinxes. Literally, bad luck spells. Jinxes are mild, dark magic. They're more prank than peril. Think of a curse that makes someone's shoes squeak non-stop. Even some defensive spells fall under this umbrella. Obstacle jinxes can slow down whatever your wand is pointed at. 4. Hexes. Hexes are a step darker, poisonous enchantments that leave the target stuck in some negative state. They're closer to true black magic, causing lingering misfortune rather than mere inconvenience. Ryan paused, letting Kate absorb the distinctions before continuing through the remaining 3 branches. I settled back on my bench as Professor Merrick moved on to the next topic in defense against the dark arts. He just finished outlining the 4 main categories of harmful magic. First, poison spells, things like the Bat Hex and the Horn Curse. These deliver venomous effects directly into the victim's system. Second, curses, or black magic. These are the truly nasty ones, inflicting excruciating pain, paralysis, unconsciousness, sometimes even worse. No need to list examples, you know them by heart. The last 2 are counterspells, designed to halt or deflect an enemy's magic, and healing spells, used to mend wounds and ease suffering. As he spoke, I couldn't help but smile inwardly. In my previous life, I'd only ever read the Chinese translations of these classes. The fine distinctions between poison, curse, counter, and healing were lost on me back then. Only those fluent in English, or who read the original texts, grasped the full nuance. "Ah," said Ryan, a bright Ravenclaw with a sharp mind and an even sharper wand. "Professor, what exactly does this course focus on? What spells should we master first?" Professor Merrick gestured toward Kate, a third year from Gryffindor who looked mildly annoyed at being called upon. "Spellwork in this class centers on charms, jinxes, and hexes," she replied, scowling. "We learn how to cast them, and more importantly, how to defend against them." "Exactly right," Merrick beamed. 10 points to Ravenclaw. A ripple of applause sounded from her house table. Ryan's eyes gleamed as he lowered his wand. "But Professor, why divide them this way? Why not just teach every spell at once?" Kate shrugged and muttered, "Because it's fun?" Merrick laughed. "Not just for fun, Miss Longbottom. Classifying spells into these categories helps you young witches and wizards appreciate their different dangers and the proper countermeasures more intuitively. When you know exactly what you're up against, you can defend yourselves and others with far greater skill." I nodded to myself. That was the key. Here at Hogwarts, every lesson was more than magical theory. It was survival. And I, an unexpected traveler from another time, was determined to learn every trick of the trade. Black magic and white magic are just stupid labels, something only Gryffindors would come up with, Ryan scoffed, arms crossed. Kate cocked her head. "And what about Hufflepuff?" she asked, puzzled. Then she waved her hand apologetically. "Sorry, Hufflepuff. Mr. Ryan, before I transmigrated, I always picked Hufflepuff in that mobile game." Ryan let out an exasperated sigh, pressing his fingertips against his temples. "They'd rather gossip than bother learning any magic they don't already know," he muttered. Nearby, Hannah, nicknamed the Badger for her nosing out secrets, snorted. She was the same third year who'd once insisted that Sirius Black had snuck into Hogwarts disguised not as a dog but as an orchid. In reality, he'd turned into a large black dog. Shaking his head, Ryan said under his breath, "Still, you'd best watch out. You might get tangled up in a curse someday. Real dark magic." Kate laughed, unconvinced. "No way. By the time anything like that happens, fake Moody will be teaching defense against the dark arts, but I'll have graduated by then, anyway." Ryan's cheeks flushed. "I'm too young to worry about fake Moody, or Hogwarts professors for that matter. Percy's 4 years older than me, and I haven't even set foot at Hogwarts yet." He grabbed his towel from the bench, threw it over his shoulder, and rolled his eyes. "I'm off to shower. Need to cool down after this." With that, he stalked off, leaving Kate to shake her head in bemusement. It's surprisingly easy to slip up when you still think like a mere mortal. Though Ryan's mind perpetually ran its defenses, scanning, analyzing, warding against every conceivable threat, he forced himself to remain this vigilant every single day, if only to refine the depths of his heart. The thrill of play had left a small part of his consciousness clinging to the values and thought patterns of his past life. As a result, even outside of pure combat, battling wards, weaving spells, he sometimes made little verbal blunders, almost as if he meant to provoke someone. Ryan stepped around the sofa and pushed open the door on his left. Instantly, he found himself staring into a bathroom whose floor looked like overlapping black and green scales, each tile gleaming with a metallic sheen. Above the wash basin hung a mirror framed by 2 enormous, gilded horns. Every detail hinted at Romanian longhorn dragons. No full-bodied dragon statue, yet the illusion was complete. One glance, and you could almost hear wings beating. Such extravagant, flamboyant design made perfect sense once you remembered who lived here. Wizards, cut off from the ordinary world of muggles, delighted in these wild, otherworldly touches. in their attire as much as in their architecture. Muggle fashion has quietly crept into Hogwarts. In its earliest days, no one would have described the clothes worn beneath the robes as suits. Yet today, it's not unusual to spot Ron Weasley lacing up his favorite sneakers or Cornelius Fudge slipping into a dark green suit under his pinstripe cloak. Most of the older generation still cling to a purely wizarding wardrobe, garments that look as indistinct as pajamas, or the heavy pleated skirts and South American-style cloaks favored by a few traditionalists. But they are increasingly in the minority. Across the wizarding world, Muggle games, styles, and ideas are seeping in, infusing the community with fresh creativity and energy, especially among the younger witches and wizards. It's almost unimaginable now, but until the early 19th century, Hogwarts students reached the school either by horse-drawn carriage or portkey. Everything changed in 1827, when Minister for Magic Adeline Gamble oversaw an unprecedented operation. The ministry deployed 167 memory charms and cast the largest concealment enchantment in British history to acquire a steam locomotive from a Muggle engineer in Crewe, Cheshire. Thus was born the Hogwarts Express, a symbol of a wizarding world that was, slowly but surely, opening its doors to Muggle innovation. By morning, every witch and wizard in Hogsmeade awoke to find a full-blown railway station where only open fields had stood the night before. The Minister of Magic, ever decisive and unyielding, had decreed that henceforth no Hogwarts student would arrive by broomstick, portkey, or apparition. If you weren't on the Hogwarts Express, you simply wouldn't set foot at the school. Any lingering gripes about unsafe machinery, poor hygiene, or the alleged detriment of Muggle iron were swiftly silenced once the proudest pure-blood families watched their children file neatly onto the Scarlet steam engine. The only people left reeling were the Muggle engineers who'd rushed in to build the station. Over the next year, each of them discovered, much to their dismay, that some vital component had been misplaced, or perhaps simply vanished into thin air during the ministry's hush-hush construction. They spent the better part of 12 months hoping for compensation from the Department of Magical Transportation. Amid all this upheaval, Arthur Weasley couldn't hide a triumphant grin. His fascination with Muggle inventions had long been dismissed as a harmless hobby. Yet by recognizing their skill and quietly placing a small wager on their success, he'd shown himself to be far more farsighted than anyone had given him credit for. Chapter 50. Target Ryan sank into the warm bathwater and exhaled in pure relief. It felt like ages since he'd last enjoyed more than a hurried castle shower or a damp carriage ride. Magic was wonderful, and being a wizard even more so. If he'd had this power in his previous life, he would have retreated entirely from the world. Armed with Wi-Fi and a full arsenal of spells, he'd never have to step outside. Being a smith had its advantages too. Generations of his family had lived in constant preparedness, hoarding resources against every conceivable crisis. As a result, Ryan now struggled to find anything worth buying. He could brew every potion, forge every tool, and grow every herb in his own backyard. A bicycle? Why bother when he could conjure one in minutes? He thought of the Weasleys, bright, cheerful, and perpetually strapped for cash, and winced. They exemplified the stereotype of the struggling wizarding family, but their optimism drove them to spend on needless luxuries. In reality, wizards needed almost no money. Magic could summon what they lacked and replicate what they already owned. The real barrier wasn't a lack of resources, but the limits of the everyday magic market. Enchantments for stain removal and gourmet cooking were commonplace, but spells for textile production, crop cultivation, or magical creature husbandry were almost non-existent. And alchemy? Practically a myth in Britain. It wasn't surprising that even industrious families like the Weasleys found it hard to get by. As the steam curled around his shoulders, Ryan smiled. If only the rest of the wizarding world understood his secret. True power lay not in spending gold, but in expanding the boundaries of magic itself. And he intended to show them exactly how. Chapter 12. The Limits of Magic and the Need for Practical Skills. Wizards may wield astonishing power, but their magic isn't limitless. Energy reserves deplete, and no single spell can handle every household chore. You can't simultaneously transfigure a ball gown and tend to a flock of nifflers. That's why even the most accomplished witches and wizards buy ready-made robes or brews from specialist craftsmen. In time, a handful of suppliers came to dominate the market, driving up the value of gold galleons and fueling a profitable monopoly. Those who argue for endless transfiguration often overlook a simple truth. While changing a cloak's hue or shape can baffle muggles, any witch or wizard versed in transfiguration sees right through it. Remember Ron Weasley's reaction to the ugly Yule Ball dress in their 4th year? Instead of reworking the whole garment, Hermione merely clipped off the tacky lace from his dated purple frock, proof that sometimes a mundane solution outclasses a flashy spell. Even Molly Weasley exemplifies this balance. She's unmatched in kitchen magic. Her Sunday roasts and treacle tarts are the stuff of legend, but she never turned to enchantments to sew her children's uniforms. Yet when danger loomed, she showed breathtaking prowess in dueling, single-handedly defeating Bellatrix Lestrange, one of the Dark Lord's most formidable Death Eaters. Clearly, domestic magic and martial skill can coexist, but they don't always. At Hogwarts, we've traditionally separated our studies into neat categories: charms, potions, care of magical creatures, herbology. Yet we rarely bridge the gap between theory and practical self-sufficiency. Why not introduce a household enchantments class tailored to home management, or expand herbology and magical creatures courses to teach students how to use spells for efficient farming and livestock care? Imagine magically accelerated soil, self-watering herb beds, or nifflers trained to locate buried ingredients. Such lessons would empower countless families to produce their own food, fabrics, and potion components, slashing household expenses and weakening the stranglehold of monopolistic traders. Magic was meant to improve every aspect of life, including the everyday chores that keep a household running. By combining skillful spellwork with traditional crafts, witches and wizards could free up hard-earned galleons for rarer curiosities, perhaps the latest alchemical discoveries or an adventurous trip to the ruins of Planchon Petaroa. Of course, not every wizard feels this urgency. Far too many are content to spend money they're too accustomed to spending, leaving the rest of us chained to overpriced robes and underpaid potion makers. But for the industrious, like our unnamed model student, Smith, self-reliance isn't just a novelty, it's a necessity. And with a few changes to the curriculum, Hogwarts could help an entire generation master both wandwork and handiwork, securing their independence and their wallets against the whims of any marketplace. Wizards really are versatile. Take the daydream spell invented by the Weasley twins. With the right props and a simple incantation, you're plunged into a 30-minute hyper-realistic daydream. The only side effects? A glazed-over expression and the occasional drool. You can explore any fantasy you like, even those too wild to put into words, so it's no surprise they refuse to sell it to anyone under 16. In truth, the magic behind it isn't all that complicated. Any Hogwarts professor could master it in no time. And once you can conjure the perfect companion or scenario at will, why bother with a real partner? Severus Snape, for instance, gifted in occlumency, probably finds this trick as effortless as eating breakfast. I wouldn't be shocked if, between brewing potions and carrying out Dumbledore's orders, he slips away into a private reverie with Lily. It also explains why Gellert Grindelwald, locked away by his own ambitions, leads such a Spartan life. All he needs is the youthful image of Dumbledore and a simple bicycle to roam through his memories. As for me, Ryan, I've discovered a shortcut that requires no spells at all. After spending hours as an adult gazing at the enchanted portrait in the Smith's bathroom, I realized I could project my consciousness straight into the painting. Now I can wander its world anytime I choose, no incantation required. There once lived a homeowner whose wife, blinded by jealousy, relentlessly tried to destroy a particular enchanted painting in their home. Yet, through some combination of a potent, permanent binding spell and mysteries now lost to time, that sole magical portrait still hangs on the wall to this day. Among the so-called daydream spells, occlumency stands out as both the most sophisticated and the hardest to master. Had Harry learned it, he would have thrown himself into its study and might never have fallen under Voldemort's sway, sparing Sirius that tragic fate. Occlumency can even blunt the effects of Veritaserum and weave false memories into the mind. In fact, Many of Ryan's higher-level cognitive tricks are simply a refined version of this same discipline. Any wizard who works with advanced magic will sooner or later confront its challenges. The true test of occlumency lies in self-control. At 11, innocent of the wizarding world, Harry's mind was clear enough that he could have picked up the basics without too much strain. But once adolescence arrived, with its mood swings, impulsiveness, and new attractions, the rigorous mental discipline required became almost impossible for him to maintain. Chapter 7. The Weight of Silence. Draco Malfoy had long mastered the art of ruthless self-discipline. With each waking hour, he forbade himself any stray sympathy or unnecessary feeling. Under the twin pressures of Bellatrix Lestrange's brutal training and the dark task before him, the assassination of Albus Dumbledore, he'd learned to lock away his heart entirely. Even Severus Snape's most probing legitimacy yielded nothing but a frozen mask. Yet beneath that icy exterior, Draco was on the verge of collapse. Night after night, as the castle slumbered, he slipped into Moaning Myrtle's deserted bathroom and let the tears he denied himself spill free. No one knew those hidden cries, but each sob echoed the price he paid for his own cruelty. Draco was far from Trey, the only gifted young wizard in Hogwarts history. Time and again, students brimming with promise faltered under poor leadership or rivalries that drove them apart. Had those prodigies been pushed to their limits, both in study and in combat training, they might have become legends in their own right. If only they could have set aside their differences and stood together, what hope would Voldemort's terror have then posed? Tom Riddle rose to power not solely by magic, but by exploiting the fractures within the wizarding world. His reign thrived on fear, and on an establishment that pretended stability by stifling its brightest talents. Hogwarts itself cried out for reform. A school that choked its students with tradition rather than honing their abilities would always leave them vulnerable. It was only when Ryan, newly arrived from another era, wandered the corridors of time that the real reasons behind Cornelius Fudge's tenure as Minister of Magic became clear. Fudge, inept in both policy and prowess, had clung to office not through merit but by pandering to complacency. By the time Ryan pieced it all together, the wizarding world was already staggering under long-neglected flaws. Draco's tears were not mere weakness. They were the quiet testimony of a boy forced into darkness, his potential shackled by secrecy and fear. Underneath the pale walls of the bathroom, he vowed that if the magical community could find unity, if Hogwarts could embrace real change, no tyrant, no matter how fearsome, would ever stand unchallenged again. Cornelius Fudge's principal strengths lie in his gift for spin and his unwavering obedience to Albus Dumbledore. During the election, he never missed an opportunity to imply that Dumbledore had his full backing, and that suggestion alone carried him into office. In these newly peaceful times, the wizarding community craved a minister of magic who could smooth over trouble, not one who thundered that Voldemort lived on and demanded constant vigilance. Fudge understood this perfectly. Under his leadership, the ministry strives to keep young witches and wizards wrapped up in theory, while it quietly, yet firmly, steers everything else. Although Fudge has neglected genuine personnel reform, he exerts tight control over public opinion. His entire career rests on one pillar: whitewashing any threat. That is exactly why he refuses to countenance Voldemort's return. To Fudge, Dumbledore's insistence on war preparations smacks of a power play. Peaceful evolution, he calls it. But Fudge sees a grab for authority. And even if Lord Voldemort truly did rise again, Fudge, as a proud pureblood, isn't remotely afraid he'd be targeted. After all, Voldemort's very resurrection in the original account serves as Fudge's greatest vindication. The Dark Lord made his return without touching the minister's comfortable seat. Hogwarts is more than capable of teaching advanced magic on its own, but the combined forces of the Aurors, the Wizarding Army, and the Magical Law Enforcement Department also need a specialized, higher-level curriculum. That's why true wizarding universities are indispensable. At 17, most Hogwarts graduates are hurled straight into the wider world. Many of the brightest minds leave with little more than a certificate, while the rest struggle to find their place. Ideally, the 7 years at Hogwarts should forge independent witches and wizards, capable of thriving even outside the protective bubble of the magical community. After that, it's the university's job to refine their talents, to protect their ideals from political infighting and economic schemes. By the time these young magicians step into society again, they'll be cleaner, purer, and ready to shape the future of magic on their own terms. For the first time in his life, Ryan understood his true calling. He would either become Hogwarts' next headmaster or create his own university, where students graduate at 17 and never touch another schoolbook again. It was a bold dream, but one he was determined to see through. Chapter 51: Unreliable Wizard Leaders. Ryan eased himself out of the bathtub and stood upright. Almost magically, the last water droplet slid off his skin and vanished. No steam, no damp towels needed. He toweled off, slipped into his pajamas, and stepped out just as Kate peeked through the door. She ducked in to freshen up before they both retreated to Ryan's bedroom. Once inside, Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, letting the day's events replay in his mind. He couldn't stop questioning one thing. Why had Albus Dumbledore embraced death so readily in the original story? As a longtime reader, he'd always accepted Dumbledore's self-sacrifice at face value. But now, having actually lived in this world, he saw troubling inconsistencies. Take Marvolo Gaunt's ring, the Horcrux containing the Resurrection Stone. Its curse was lethal, yes, but nothing about it prevented a wizard from forging additional Horcruxes afterward. Dumbledore knew that better than anyone. So how could a man versed in soul-splitting magic allow himself to die when he still had dark magic at his disposal? Ryan's real-world experience made the truth starkly clear. Dark wizards stop at nothing to hoard power and authority. They kill, betray, and cast forbidden spells without remorse. In contrast, the white wizards, those who claimed to guard the light, were strangely complacent. They discouraged ambition, even penalized those who sought greater strength. Their motto seemed to be, if you won't take power, someone else will. And in a world ruled by ruthless ambition, forgoing the fight was as good as surrendering. Lying back on the pillow, Ryan realized the real war here wasn't just good versus evil. It was a battle for survival in a landscape where neutrality meant defeat and where even the most revered leaders might not be all they appeared to be. In the original timeline, once Scrimgeour took office at the Ministry, he immediately adopted an aggressive stance, quite the opposite of Dumbledore's more cautious status quo approach. The result was disastrous. Voldemort's forces stormed the Ministry, seized control of the Daily Prophet to shape public opinion, and shut down any dissenting voices. Economically, Gringotts fell under Death Eater dominion as well. Ironically, Dumbledore's downfall sprang less from his strategy and more from a fatal personal weakness. Though he knew Voldemort's tactics inside and out, and even foresaw a final victory at great cost, he succumbed to the temptation of the Resurrection Stone. His greatest regret, the death of his sister Ariana, had left a wound he never truly healed. In the end, Dumbledore convinced himself that the stone could reunite him with Ariana and Aberforth, and, if necessary, grant him life beyond death. That fatal gamble was his undoing, and it opened the door for Voldemort's complete takeover. He had always known his time was short. By allowing Voldemort to believe he'd struck him a telling blow, Snape secured the Dark Lord's full attention, and in doing so, protected Draco Malfoy, neutered the power of the Elder Wand, and kept events from spiraling into even greater chaos. After Dumbledore's death, Voldemort savored his victory like a serpent, tightening his grip on the wizarding world at a leisurely pace rather than unleashing an all-out assault. He preferred to consolidate power quietly, picking off resistances one by one, rather than charging in headlong and risking unnecessary losses. At Hogwarts, Snape sat in Dumbledore's chair as headmaster, wielding authority both subtly and ruthlessly. Voldemort had never cared about pure-blood pedigrees so much as he hated muggles, feared death, and craved dominion. His policies, therefore, were less about stamping out mixed lines of descent and more about crushing dissent. Muggle-born witches and wizards were disarmed, their studies suspended. At worst, they could look forward only to expulsion, not immediate execution. Strangely, many Muggle-born students found themselves permitted to remain on the grounds. In an echo of the original Hogwarts term, Colin Creeve, ever the enthusiastic photographer, still roamed the corridors in his uniform, camera in hand. It was as if nothing had changed. the silver lining of Snape's machinations. By the time Voldemort had fully digested his conquest, Hogwarts stood eerily intact, its corridors haunted only by whispered fears and by the unbowed courage of those who would not let darkness have the last word. Ever since the fall of Voldemort, pure-blood nobles have found themselves stripped of their wands and estates, but they remain alive, untouched by Death Eater vengeance. Had Dumbledore still been at the helm, the wizarding world would likely have exploded into another full-scale war, mirroring the First Wizarding War and exacting a far bloodier toll on both sides. Instead, the Ministry has tightened its grip, and the old aristocrats have been forced to bend to new rules, surviving on the fringes of power. Worse still, the boy who lived carries an unforeseen curse of his own. In his 4th year at Hogwarts, Harry's resurrection forged a second, unwelcome bond with Voldemort, a hidden lifeline tying the Dark Lord's fate to his own. Even if Voldemort were to order Harry's death, the killing curse could only claim him once, shattering the link but obliterating the new Horcrux in Harry's scar at the same time. From a cold strategic standpoint, that's almost too good a deal for the Dark Lord to resist. Yet Dumbledore anticipated Voldemort's ruthlessness. Long before his death, the headmaster prepared a contingency. His portrait in the headmaster's office can still guide and, if necessary, override Severus Snape's covert operations. And Harry, still unknowingly housing a fragment of Voldemort's soul, remains driven by forces he barely understands. Destiny, it seems, will push him toward the remaining Horcruxes, compelling him to find them and to destroy them, whether he wants to or not. Here's a revised, coherent version of the chapter. Originally, Dumbledore's design was deceptively simple. He would reveal to Snape that Harry himself was the final Horcrux, and then, when the time was right, allow Harry to face Voldemort, ensuring that the last fragment of the Dark Lord's soul would be destroyed along with Harry's temporary sacrifice. What Dumbledore never foresaw was Voldemort's all-consuming obsession with the Deathly Hallows. When Voldemort first cornered Harry at the Ministry, he was undone, not by a Horcrux, but by the power of the Holly Wand. That unexpected defeat ignited his ravenous pursuit of the Elder Wand, an obsession that would ultimately seal Snape's fate. Snape's own downfall was born of that blind hunt. He remained loyal to his promise, but the shifting priorities at the heart of Voldemort's quest rendered every secret he carried a liability. As for Dumbledore, he had once considered creating a Horcrux himself, only to be repelled by the horrifying transformation it wrought. He recognized in Voldemort, once his brightest student, something far more destructive than mere loss of magical talent. The very process had stripped Tom Riddle of his humanity and rationality. Horrified, Dumbledore abandoned all plans to fragment his soul. In a quieter moment, Dumbledore reflected on how things might have gone differently. If he had resisted the lure of the Resurrection Stone, he could have feigned allegiance to Voldemort long enough to take Harry on the Horcrux hunt together. Had they retrieved the Horcruxes side by side, confronting Voldemort face to face might have happened under very different circumstances. But fate, like the speed of an arrow, had carried them beyond any careful blueprint. And so, in the end, each player followed their path to a reckoning no one truly expected. This version preserves all key plot points: the revelation of Harry as the final Horcrux, Dumbledore's strategic gambit, Voldemort's shift to the Hallows, Snape's downfall, and Dumbledore's abandoned Horcrux plan, while ensuring a clear, natural flow for English readers. Dumbledore's plan was audacious: have Harry absorb Voldemort's own killing curse, shattering he final Horcrux in the process, and then strike the Dark Lord down before he could recover. Nagini wouldn't even factor into the equation. Voldemort wouldn't be in a position to protect her. If matters grew dire, Dumbledore might even call on Grindelwald to join the fight as an unlikely ally. Ryan stared at the swirling lines of magic on the parchment, his heart pounding. So all that remained was the Resurrection Stone Horcrux. And that was his responsibility? He thought, breathless. Had Dumbledore not been struck by that curse, Voldemort would have fallen long ago, and Harry might have perished back in his 5th year. Time and again, Harry's instincts about the Horcruxes had proven right. The whisper of one hidden within Hogwarts, dismissed by Hermione, the destruction of the Holly Wand, even Harry's narrow escape at Godric's Hollow. And of course, Nagini herself had turned out to be a Horcrux. With Dumbledore's guidance and Harry's uncanny sense of magic, Ryan knew the endgame was within reach, so long as he followed their lead. Yet he forced himself to rein in his excitement, smoothing down the edges of a triumphant grin. Fate, he reminded himself, could always have one last surprise in store. Ever since Voldemort rose again by using Harry's blood, Dumbledore had grown more extravagant than ever. He set out on his own to hunt down and destroy the Horcruxes, a brazen move, especially given the prophecy. If destiny truly existed, Neville Longbottom ought to have been at his side. How could Dumbledore venture into such peril without the Chosen One? It was only after the grave curse at the Ministry crippled him that he finally admitted he couldn't bear the burden alone. He was forced to share his plan with Snape and with Harry himself. Before that moment, however, he had clearly intended to shoulder the entire quest single-handedly. In the end, neither Dumbledore's grand designs nor Voldemort's dark machinations could be trusted. Each in his own way left me utterly speechless. Chapter 52. Ritual of the God of Death. So many sacrifices had been wasted from the very beginning. Albus Dumbledore should have trusted the next generation more, shared his burdens, and trained them. Teaching young witches and wizards to cultivate qualities like character, love, friendship, and courage might not directly increase their raw magical power, but it wouldn't harm their development, and it could even give them unexpected advantages. After all, the greatest breakthroughs in magic often come in the form of potent defensive and protective spells. Take Lily Evans's sacrifice, for example. She channeled her maternal love into a shield so powerful it rebounded Voldemort's killing curse back on himself. She couldn't have beaten him in a duel, but that selfless magic was enough to save Harry and destroy a Dark Lord. Imagine if every witch or wizard could project that kind of love shield. What chance would Voldemort, or any dark wizard, have against an entire generation fortified by such magic? The power of positive emotion is no small thing. Impossible. Ryan's mind raced as this thought struck him. His subconscious, and that faint, uncanny instinct all wizards possess, rebelled at the idea that sacrifices alone were the key to victory. No, there had to be something more. Something gained rather than lost. He remembered a long-ignored rule. Killing among the Peverells was strictly forbidden. Yet here he was, pondering the murder of his own bloodline. That couldn't be right. James Potter, after all, was descended from Ignotus Peverell. Suddenly, clarity swept through him. Of course, the very taboo of bloodshed within the Peverell line hinted at a deeper magic, one tied to their legacy of mastery over death itself. This wasn't simply about sacrifices. It was about invoking an ancient, sacred ritual, one that demanded not loss of life, but the unbreakable bond of life's purest forces. Only by rediscovering and respecting that forgotten right could they hope to control the ultimate power and stand against the god of death itself. Voldemort was, without question, the darkest master of Horcrux magic the world had ever seen, but even he had outstripped his own limits. In his arrogance, he went beyond splitting his soul into inert vessels and instead created the ultimate Horcrux, a living child, Harry Potter. And for years, no one suspected a thing until the night he murdered James Potter, his own blood relative. Dumbledore had long whispered that Voldemort had shattered his soul too many times. What no one realized was that the key to his undoing lay in the legend of the Peverell brothers, Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus. It took a startling discovery for the truth to emerge. Ryan had returned, half asleep, to the old Smith alchemy hut after uncovering a riddle in Godric's Hollow. There, in the Potter family plot, he found Ignotus Peverell's grave empty. It struck him then. Voldemort was descended from Cadmus Peverell, the original bearer of the Resurrection Stone, and he still carried Slytherin's blood through the Gaunt line. In order to forge another tether to life, Voldemort slaughtered James Potter, the last heir of Ignotus's line and rightful owner of the invisibility cloak. By spilling his own kind's blood, Voldemort invoked the ancient taboo, an unspeakable curse that condemned the very hand that wielded it. That curse, Ryan realized, was the hidden reason the prophecy named 3 chosen children, Harry Potter, Neville Longbottom, and the long-forgotten Lane Smith. In marking Harry as his final Horcrux, Voldemort had doomed himself. His soul, already fractured by too many dark rituals and stained by the murder of his own blood, could never hold together. In his fatal attempt to triumph over death, he unwittingly set in motion his own destruction. Voldemort's decision to slaughter the entire Riddle family, his paternal Muggle kin, did more than satisfy his craving for power. By eradicating that branch of his bloodline, he cleansed himself of any lingering impurities, sharpening his magic to its purest form. Yet in a coup, truest, his soul remained whole, and some deep intuition, mixed with a need for a convenient scapegoat, compelled him to spare Morphin Gaunt. Had he, in that moment, already forged multiple Horcruxes and ignored that inner warning, then killed Morphin outright, he likely would have paid the price. The catastrophic backlash could have destroyed him long before Harry's birth. Lane pondered the implications. So the only question left is this: if I destroy one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, am I effectively killing a blood relative? By Harry's own reckoning, the answer appeared to be no. Harry never cast the killing curse. When Voldemort fell, it was his own spell rebounding against him, so Harry bore no sin of murder and lived the rest of his days in peace. But Lane's thoughts drifted to Ryan, another child of the prophecy. Would the act of traveling through time strip Ryan of that fateful title? His instincts screamed that it wouldn't, but what if Ryan ran into the same misfortune as Dumbledore and failed to destroy a Horcrux for reasons no one could predict? One misstep, one unforeseen flaw, and the entire future they were fighting for could unravel. Lane felt a cold knot in his stomach. The stakes had never been higher. Ryan watched as Harry and Neville slipped away, his mind racing. In Peverell lore, killing a cursed being like Voldemort, or destroying his Horcruxes, wasn't counted as blood killing, but that didn't make the act any less weighty. Voldemort's life was precious in its own twisted way. Unless he ascended to some godlike realm, Ryan had no plans to hunt down Horcruxes himself anytime soon. Besides, the British wizarding world was so tight-knit, everyone was tied by blood or marriage, that he still wondered why he, Harry, and Neville had all become children of prophecy. Was it simply the concentration of pure blood lineage, or maybe something as mundane as surname inheritance: Potter, Longbottom, Smith, Gaunt? Then there was the old Peverell myth, 3 brothers vying for mastery over death. According to legend, the youngest, Ignotus, prevailed, becoming the god of the afterlife. Did that make Harry, Neville, and Ryan his descendants, heirs to the death god's legacy? In the end, titles meant little. Death was real, whether you carried a name or not. Perhaps it was that ancient bloodline that granted Voldemort his eerie proficiency with the killing curse. But if Ignotus Peverell truly embodied death, why had he unleashed the curse after his brutal struggle for power, thereby condemning his own kin? That, Ryan realized, was the true tragedy of seeking ultimate authority. Everyone overlooks what they lose in the process. Ryan summoned a cup of black tea from the void, lifted it to his lips, and took a slow, thoughtful sip. He set it down gently, allowing himself a moment of quiet reflection. Kate stepped into the chamber, her eyes immediately finding his. "Ryan, what are you thinking about?" she asked, settling on the edge of the table beside him. Without hesitation, she accepted the steaming cup and cradled it in both hands. He offered her a small, knowing smile. "This journey, it's been more meaningful than I ever imagined." His tone suggested layers of discovery she hadn't yet seen. If they hadn't set out on this quest, he never would have learned the names of the 3 fabled brothers, or uncovered the potential ritual of death itself. Born from a single spark of thought, that ritual wove together 3 extraordinary wizards, 3 ancient artifacts that have always existed in the physical world, 3 distinct encounters with mortality, and the long-buried story of 3 ill-fated siblings. In their legend, everything came in threes. And at its heart lay a cruel paradox. When the dust settled, the last brother standing, the sole survivor, would claim the title of Master of Death, the ultimate victor in a contest far deadlier than any duel. Ryan's mind drifted to Ignotus Peverell. Was he the god of death incarnate, a descendant of that god, or perhaps both, a living testament to a divine test laid down by his ancestors, or the product of legends spun by wizardkind? The eldest brother had chosen the Elder Wand, the strongest wand ever made. The second had taken up the Resurrection Stone, granting him the power to call the departed back from beyond the veil. Kate listened, her gaze fixed on the swirling tea in her cup. Outside, the world carried on in oblivion, but here, between them, the weight of ancient magic and untold power pressed in. The final choice still loomed, waiting for the one bold enough to master death itself. The story of the three brothers is well known. The first brother, driven by pride, seized the Elder Wand, an instrument of unparalleled power, but fell victim to his own arrogance. The second, tempted by grief, took the Resurrection Stone in a vain hope to bring back a lost loved one, only to be consumed by sorrow. It was the third brother, Ignotus Peverell, who proved the wisest. He claimed the invisibility cloak that could hide him even from death itself, and thus alone departed this world without ever truly dying, becoming, in legend, the master of death. Ryan paused, torn between plunging deeper into the mystery and trusting his instincts. His reconnaissance skill had honed a wizard's intuition so finely that any further probing felt risky. He withdrew his curiosity for the moment, and yet something stirred in the air. The three Hallows, Elder Wand, Resurrection Stone, and Invisibility Cloak, were growing stronger, their powers amplified by the weight of myth and the arcane focus of wizarding minds. Rumors whispered that the new Master of Death might summon another trial, testing whether he was worthy to wield such artifacts, or whether he would become their next victim. In the pages of the original tale, long after these events, Albus Dumbledore spoke to Harry Potter of the Hallows' true nature. "Perhaps one person in a million could master all three Hallows at once, Harry," Dumbledore had said. "I, for one, was only ever fit to claim the least remarkable of them, the Elder Wand. I cannot boast of its power, nor did I seek to slay with it. I bore it simply to save others when they needed me. As for the invisibility cloak, I kept it out of idle curiosity. It has never served me as faithfully as it will serve you. You are its real master. And the Resurrection Stone, well, that I lost long ago, when I let it slip from my grasp." As those words echoed in Ryan's mind, he wondered, would history repeat itself? Would the Master of Death face a new reckoning? Or would this be the moment when myth gave way to mastery, and a new legend was born? "For that stone, I intend to wrench the sleepers back by force, unlike you, who relies on self-sacrifice. It's precisely that boldness that makes you worthy of the Hallows. To combine the Fate Stick's power to save others, the Invisibility Cloak's gift of concealment, and the Resurrection Stone's promise of selfless return, this, I realize, is death's new trial. After Harry Potter falls, like Ignotus Peverell, his tomb will stand empty, and he himself will become the new Lord of Death. Could this calamity be nothing more than a divine test? Are the tragedies that befell Ryan, Neville, and Harry's parents all rooted in this same design? It sounds absurd, yet I wonder, could the Fate Stick, or even the Elder Wand, ever serve Ryan or Neville as perfectly as the cloak has served Harry? Neville's grandmother dismissed the wand outright. Did she believe her grandson was destined for something far greater, a weapon born of death and conquest, handed down through bloodshed? And what of Smith, the alchemist descended from Antioch Peverell? Did he renounce his birthright to the Elder Wand, choosing instead to forge a new one in secret? The more I examine this tale, the more I see it is no simple children's story, but a labyrinth of hidden snares. Chapter 53, Lockhart's New Book. Ryan grinned as he opened the small, leather-bound volume. With the system finally offline, he was free to delve into what looked like an innocent fairy tale. He knew the original work inside and out. He could follow its simplest path, avoid any hidden snares, and perhaps even unlock the legendary powers buried beneath its pages. After all, as a direct descendant of the Peverells, he wasn't one to be foiled by a few magical mishaps. With the right mix of cunning and caution, he could well ascend to a role even greater than death itself. "Ryan, what are you reading?" Kate's voice broke through his thoughts. She cocked her head and peered at the cover in his hands. He showed her the title, The Tales of Beetle the Poet. "It's Lockhart's newest release." Kate waved her hand dismissively. "I gave up on this book when I was 5. She reached into her robes and produced a battered vampire novel of unknown origin. In Ravenclaw Tower, books were the currency of conversation, and the two friends soon fell into companionable silence, the only sound the soft rustle of pages turning. Before long, both were lulled into sleep by the gentle hum of pre-dawn stillness. Morning light crept through the windows, just as Ryan stirred. His first coherent thought arrived only after he'd brushed aside Kate's bare foot, accidentally kicked into his face at some point during the night. He stretched, yawned, and reached for the fresh wizard's robes laid out beside him. Loose and spacious, they concealed whatever he chose to wear underneath. Slipping into them, he felt that familiar spark of anticipation. A new day, a new adventure, and Lockhart's tales waiting to reveal their secrets. Ryan settled into the surprisingly elegant lounge and peered out at the still gray sky. Almost on cue, a modest breakfast appeared on the table before him. A steaming cup of black tea, a bowl of chickpeas, slices of crusty bread, and a few grilled sausages. He reached for the Daily Prophet lying on the sofa and began to read, punctuating each paragraph with a sip of tea. Flipping to page 13, he paused at a photograph that always made him squirm. The image showed a woman in jewel-encrusted spectacles, her blonde hair arranged in perfect ringlets. She grinned broadly, 8 teeth on display, and waved one manicured finger as if she were the very picture of charm. Ryan snorted. That grin is straight out of Lockhart's playbook, 8 teeth flashing, yet somehow he still looks dashing. Poor Rita Skeeter, she's got none of the flair. He tapped the page. All right, let's see what she's penned this time, he muttered, raising the cup to his lips once more. After all, Gilderoy Lockhart's prose was renowned for its elegance and romance, qualities very much aligned with his own easygoing good looks. When I arrived at Gilderoy Lockhart's warm, inviting home, he met me at the door and promptly led me into the kitchen for tea. A generous slice of cake, so rich it practically dripped sugar and cream, and of course, some piping hot conversation. Rita Skeeter was already there, quill in hand, ready to record every precious detail. Needless to say, Lockhart is a man of dreams, she announced, her eyes shining. He's handsome, fearless, and claims to have solved every magical mishap imaginable on his travels. And as if that weren't enough, he's a best-selling author. She tapped her quill on the table. His newest work, Gilderoy Lockhart Teaches You How to Get Rid of Pests from Home, is already indispensable to wizarding families everywhere. I have no doubt wizards across the globe will be clamoring for it. There's no question that Lockhart works at lightning speed. He penned the entire 500-page guide in just 2 weeks on the road. Curious, I asked how he managed such a feat. He leaned back, flashing that famous smile. When you've published as many books as I have and you're constantly on the move, he said, you learn to carve out writing time wherever you can. I know so many magical households struggle with pests, niffler nibblers, boggart raid, you name it, so I wanted to provide a clear, comprehensive guide to rid homes of these nuisances once and for all. As I savored my tea, I couldn't resist bringing up the rumor circulating in the Daily Prophet, someone claiming to be Gilderoy's Hogwarts classmate. Gilderoy Lockhart? He's the sort of man who gives everyone headaches, sneered a boy at the back of the classroom. And the stories in his books? They're about as believable as the pictures on chocolate frog cards. Lockhart paused in his wand polishing and glanced up, a brilliant smile lighting his face. Ah, my dear old schoolmate. What a pleasure to hear from you. I still recall announcing that I would master the Philosopher's Stone before graduation, lead the English Quidditch team to a World Cup victory, and become the youngest minister of magic Britain has ever seen, he declared, puffing out his chest. But that doesn't mean I can't pursue more practical goals, like ridding the world of evil, and of course, perfecting my very own line of hair conditioners. No sooner had he spoken than the gossip rags pounced. Newspapers and magazines printed exclusive stories from alleged former classmates, painting Lockhart as a shameless egomaniac. They claimed he once carved his name in 20-foot-tall letters across the Quidditch pitch, an escapade that supposedly earned him a week's detention in the school cells. They said he'd projected his own face into the night sky, mimicking the dark mark, sent 800 Valentine's Day cards to himself, and on one memorable morning had to cancel breakfast when a deluge of owls left his cereal bowl buried under feathers and droppings. Through it all, Lockhart simply chuckled, straightened his robes, and tacked up yet another dazzling testimonial on the dojo's notice board. Proof, he said, that the truth is always stranger and far more glamorous than rumor. How, you may wonder, did I become an exceptional wizard, an Order of Merlin, 3rd class, recipient, an honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts Alliance, and 5-time winner of Wizarding Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. "Oh, my dear," Lockhart said with a dazzling grin, patting my hand as if bestowing a medal, "you and I both know the truth. With that head full of perfect curls, that fearless spark in your eye, and your trusty peacock feather quill, able to record 1,000 words in minutes, you're practically a writing machine." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "And let's not forget, you're a Ravenclaw. Only the sharpest minds see talent when they spot it." Lockhart waved away any hint of scandal with a flourish. "All those nasty rumors, mere trifles. If you've followed my career, you'll see the evidence is as plain as day. With Dumbledore's blessing, I founded and ran the Hogwarts student newspaper, refining my craft from the start. Since then, I've laid the restless Wanlun ghosts to rest, banished the Greek ghouls, subdued the Northern European vampires, outsmarted the trolls of Poland, pacified the XZ snowmen, and even brought the notorious German dominatrix episode to a close. Every one of those adventures is chronicled, chapter and verse, in my published works." Gilderoy Lockhart's new guidebook, Gilderoy's Guide to Household Pests, promises a truly comprehensive, foolproof approach to banishing every unwanted creature from your home. If you're dying to know his most astonishing discovery, you'll have to buy the book first. With a confident chuckle, Lockhart assures even the most seasoned housekeeping witches and wizards that his techniques will shatter their complacency. And for those who already make their living chasing pests, they'll find methods so simple yet brilliantly effective that they couldn't have dreamed them up themselves. Honestly, he adds with a flourish, no wizarding family should be without Gilderoy Lockhart teaches you how to rid your home of pests. Intrigued, I asked whether his book really covers every type of pest. Lockhart's eyes twinkled. "Oh, goblins are merely the opening act key. He replied. "The creatures I tackle in this guide are far more troublesome, and even sneakier than those curtain-nesting nifflers. No, you can't imagine the kinds of pests that can invade a home," Gilderoy Lockhart exclaimed, eyes alight with enthusiasm. Even with all his accolades and best-selling titles, could he really be more effective than the top Muggle cleaning services? "I'm delighted you brought that up," he said with a knowing smile. "Those companies pride themselves on plain, everyday magic. Well, after my new book hits the shelves, they'll have to step aside. People will see that pest control isn't some exclusive secret guarded by a handful of wizarding families. Anyone can master it once they've read my methods." He waved away the rest of the topic as if it were already settled, then steered the conversation toward the detail every reader was bound to want. "Yes, indeed. On August 1st, my newest masterpiece, Gilderoy Lockhart Teaches You How to Banish Every Home Pest, will be available at all major bookstores. Prepare to say farewell to every flea, rat, and boggart you ever feared." I pressed him further. Had he been working on anything else recently? Hidden feats that hadn't yet made it into print? Lockhart's grin grew even wider. "Ah, a brand new project," he said, settling back in his chair. "This one chronicles my adventures eradicating evil in foreign lands, and I'm not proud to admit it, some of the darker actions I took along the way, including acts of rape in a far-off country. Of course, I won't confess every detail here. Some chapters are best left to the imagination until my next book's release. Some of these details tread on sensitive ground, personal privacy, national security. I really can't go into them now, and that's without even mentioning the writing process." Our conversation naturally drifted to Gilderoy's recently launched shampoo. I couldn't help asking, "So what makes your formula stand out compared to Porter's?" With a self-satisfied smile, Gilderoy leaned back. "Oh, I'm not about to give away all my secrets. Today's about celebrating my new book, after all. But let's just say I've woven in a unique blend of bird and serpent egg yolks for unbeatable shine. Potter's old recipe is practically prehistoric, and if that obstinate Newt Scamander hadn't whined about endangering species, my sales figures would have been through the roof." After that tantalizing revelation, I took my leave. It was clear. Gilderoy Lockhart's latest memoir would rocket straight to the top of the bestseller lists. Meanwhile, every home cleaning service in Britain was no doubt trembling, dreading the moment he exposed their grifter's playbook. Later, as Ryan finished reading the closing lines, dark frustration flickered across his face. "Honestly," he muttered, "if you publish this, it'll be splashed all over the Daily Prophet, and you know Rita Skeeter will jump at the chance for her own skewering." Gilderoy Lockhart really is the wizarding world's biggest celebrity and the secret crush of countless middle-aged and elderly witches. But merely selling books and even dabbling in leek slicing wasn't enough for him. Now he's launched his own line of shampoo. Rumor has it he's teamed up with a major magical cleaning company to roll out a whole range of enchanted household products. What makes this shampoo special, or, depending on your point of view, abhorrent, is its claimed use of egg yolks from rare magical birds and serpents. If the protections for magical creatures were even half as strong as in the Muggle world, Lockhart would find himself behind bars. And the price? Outrageous. It's little different from unscrupulous merchants selling shark fin soup as a panacea for every ailment under the sun. Then again, Lockhart isn't alone in this game. He and Rita Skeeter, two Ravenclaws through and through, are equally adept at leveraging their intelligence for profit. At the end of the day, each of them is simply doing whatever it takes to get ahead. They were two of Hogwarts' most celebrated graduates, and yet two of its greatest disappointments. Gilderoy Lockhart built his entire career on Obliviate, slipping memory charms over his rivals' real adventures and claiming their deeds for himself. Rita Skeeter, by contrast, used her rare gift for transfiguration to become an unregistered animagus, a little beetle that flitted into private conversations, harvesting secrets for her next sensational exposé. Both possessed prodigious magical talents. Lockhart's skill with memory charms was so elegant that he left powerful witches and wizards convinced they'd never had remarkable adventures at all, while he paraded their exploits in best-selling travel memoirs. Skeeter's mastery of human-to-beetle transformation placed her among the mere 7 officially registered animagi of the 20th century, a list so short that it omits daring unregistered shapeshifters like James Potter and his marauder friends. Yet their gifts proved to be curses rather than blessings. Lockhart was brilliant, but only when success could come easily. Effort bored him, and genuine study threatened his perfect public image. Skeeter, fiercely driven to break the hottest story, poured endless hours into gossip, yet she cared nothing for the people behind the headlines. Both became slaves to applause and gold, indulging every vanity, and living as hollow mortals despite their powers. It's tragic that neither Lockhart nor Skeeter ever understood what lay beyond fame and fortune. In their haste to shine, they sacrificed the very magic that might have made them truly great. All a wizard truly needs to study is magic. With magic, anything is possible. A love potion can win a heart, the Philosopher's Stone can grant immortality, and influence, well, just ask Dumbledore. He could claim any position he desired, even the office of Minister of Magic, if he so chose. What else does Hogwarts teach but the arcane arts? Magic's power springs from the mind, yet our minds go untrained. No courses in mental health, no lessons in emotional resilience. Instead, students splinter into cliques and rival factions. It's clear, Hogwarts is overdue for reform, be it a wider wizarding university or at least an overhaul of its curriculum. "Ryan, what are you doing?" Kate asked, tugging at the hem of her plain blue Ravenclaw robe. Her brow creased in confusion. "Reading the Prophet," Ryan replied without looking up. "Ugh, Rita Skeeter again?" Kate scrunched her nose. "Why does she always have to be in the spotlight?" Ryan glanced at the page. "Rita Skeeter? Who's that?" Kate's brown eyes flashed with annoyance. "She's that insufferable reporter, always twisting stories for a scandal, and if that weren't bad enough, some of the Ravenclaw boys have started calling me Rita Skeeter II. Her friend winced. "That's harsh." "I know," Kate muttered, pressing her lips together, "but I won't let it slide." Kate was on a roll in the Ravenclaw common room. "She's single-handedly trashing our house's reputation, and she has absolutely no sense of style." Kate spat, eyes blazing. Ryan braced himself as Kate launched into her critique of Rita Skeeter. First, the hair. She's got that sun-bleached blonde that could rival Penelope Clearwater's, but she tortures it into these rigid, helmet-like ringlets. With a chin like hers, she really ought to wear her hair loose to soften her profile. Instead, she does the exact opposite. Then came the spectacles. Those jewel-encrusted frames looked tacky enough to make even Gilderoy lock eyes with his own reflection and cringe. Kate spread her hands for emphasis. Look at her fingers. Short, thick sausages topped with 2-inch talons painted fire engine red. Every time she poses for a photo, it's either that massive chin or those claws at center stage. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper. And don't get me started on her eyebrows. They're painted on so thick you could pave a road with them. To top it all off, she's got 3 gold teeth flashing whenever she grins. It's like she's auditioning for a pirate pantomime. Ryan couldn't help but wince. Wow, he said slowly. That was intense. From a guy's perspective, I never realized you could dissect someone's looks so thoroughly. It's not that men don't complain, we do, but we're absolute amateurs compared to that. When we insult someone, we usually stick to what we think we know best. Kate flashed a triumphant smile. Welcome to the art of female critique, she said, settling back into her armchair. Consider yourself enlightened. Kate paused at the door of Rita Skeeter's sitting room and took it all in. Crocodile skin handbags in acid green, a magenta velvet sofa so bright it stung the eyes, and drapes that looked as though they'd been plucked from a neon sunbeam. None of it, the flamboyant colors or the ostentatious textures, did much to disguise Kate's diminutive frame and boyish build. But if anyone could wear a screaming palette with confidence, it was her. Ryan cleared his throat. Actually, I came by about Gilderoy Lockhart's new book. Kate whirled around mid-complaint. She'd been in the middle of mocking Rita's mismatched accessories. Lockhart? That. She frowned, then brightened. Oh, right. You mentioned him before when we were talking about vampire sightings. Her interest snapped into focus. So what's the title? Ryan braced himself. Domestic Enchantments, a House Wizard's Handbook. Housework. Kate burst out laughing, flopping onto the sofa and clutching her sides. Tears of mirth pooled in the corners of her eyes. Wizards and housework. What a joke. Only Lockhart would stoop that low, trying to market himself as the next great magical Martha. Ryan offered a half-smile. Well, apparently there's a whole chapter on efficient duster charms and pot polishing spells. Kate sat up, still chuckling. Of course there is. I can practically hear him boasting about his revolutionary, mundane magic for the masses. She wiped a tear from her cheek. He's so desperate for attention, he'd sell his own wand if it meant another glowing review. Ryan shook his head. I guess Lockhart really doesn't mind looking foolish, so long as it brings in the galleons. Kate stood, smoothing her skirt. Let's hope he saves enough face to manage a house-cleaning spell without turning the Dursleys' sitting room into a swamp, she grinned. I'd pay to see that. Chapter 54, The Holy 28 Saints. Thanks to Merlin, I thought, watching Kate dissolve into giggles. Lockhart's grandiloquent dramatics, paired with a bit of housekeeping magic, had turned the joke into a full-blown comedy routine. Before long, Ryan was chuckling along too, caught up in their infectious laughter for no clear reason. Once they'd quieted down, I picked up the Daily Prophet and began flipping through its pages. There wasn't a single truly entertaining article. Instead, the paper was full of barbed editorials and petty complaints aimed at the Ministry of Magic. Most of the targets were marginal departments or obscure policy tweaks. Arthur Weasley's Office for the Prohibition of Muggle Artifacts, the exact dimensions and materials allowed for alchemical crucibles, that sort of thing. Not a word about Hogwarts' budget cuts or the new political hurdles that made opening a potion shop nearly impossible. It struck me how fearless the Prophet seemed, wielding its tongue lashings against the smallest ministry decisions. No wonder Harry always said that. Ever since Voldemort's return, the Ministry shaped public opinion almost entirely through those very pages. And really, when it comes to the Weasleys, you have to admire their unwavering loyalty. Chapter 7. Shadows of the Prewets. When Ryan stumbled back through time and dusted himself off, he uncovered a startling secret. Molly Weasley's maiden name wasn't Weasley at all, but Prewett, one of the fabled Sacred 28 pure-blood families. No wonder Hagrid clung to his reverence for the Prewetts when he spoke to Harry about Voldemort's reign of terror. I've seen a boy who lived, Hagrid had once confided, his hands trembling around the large, battered suitcase. When he who must not be named decided someone was to die, there was no escaping it. Entire families, McKinnons, the Boneses, even the Prewett brothers, were extinguished in one night. You were the only one who came through. The Prewett brothers, Gideon and Fabian, had been among the founder members of the original Order of the Phoenix, standing shoulder to shoulder with Dumbledore in those dark days. Molly Prewett, meanwhile, had stayed home raising her own children, safe behind the walls of Spinner's End. By wizarding tradition, every young witch or wizard receives a gold watch on their 17th birthday, a mark of coming of age, and a family heirloom to cherish. The gilded timepiece Harry now wore had once belonged to Fabian Prewett, passed down through Molly before it reached him. Despite this proud lineage of bravery, Arthur Weasley found himself relegated to one of the Ministry's most obscure departments. Though he held the title of head, answering to no one and crafting his own departmental regulations, he was never celebrated as a hero. Arthur's imaginative spirit lay buried in dusty files and half-written memos, far from the battlefield where his in-laws had made their names. Standing amid the flickering candlelight of the old Prewett household, Ryan felt the weight of history settle upon him. The Weasley name had carried warmth and loyalty for years, but the forgotten courage of the Prewetts called out now, waiting to be reclaimed. Arthur Weasley's reputation at the Ministry often eclipses a more archaic truth. By blood, he belongs to the Sacred 28, the elite, pure-blood families whose lineages went unbroken by Muggle marriage until the 1930s. In fact, Arthur's mother, Cedrella Black, was born into the House of Black, one of those 28 houses, until she dared to marry Septimus Weasley. For that crime, she was labeled a blood traitor and struck from her family tree. The Sacred 28, sometimes called the Pure Blood 28, includes not only household names like Malfoy, Black, and Weasley, but also several families often overlooked in popular retellings. Among them are the Abbots of Hogsmeade, Hannah Abbott's ancestors; the Ollivanders of Diagon Alley, famous for their wand-making; the Crouches of Wiltshire, whose name carries complicated leg; Acey, the Longbottoms, Neville's own lineage; the line behind Borgin and Burkes, purveyors of antiques to the darker sort. Curiously, the Potters, though perfectly pure blood, were never counted. Their outspoken friendliness toward Muggles and ardent support for Muggle-born witches and wizards ran afoul of the rigid pedigree the 28 guarded so jealously. At the same time, wholly obscure surnames, like Smith, only underscore how exclusive this roll call really is. Ryan set his teacup down and frowned at the parchment in front of him, the so-called Pure Blood Registry. Ever since Neville Longbottom, himself a direct descendant of the eldest Peverell, had been granted entry, there was no hope for anyone named Smith. This list, much like the elite Forbes roll of magical aristocracy, existed to remind everyone which families scorned Muggles, and none were more reviled for their open friendliness toward the non-magical world than the Weasleys. That disdain ran so deep that houses like Malfoy and Black refused to share the registry's honor with any Weasley, branding them traitors to pure-blood tradition. It was precisely this cold shoulder from their own peers that drove Molly Prewett to elope with Arthur Weasley. No well-born matron would have approved of such a match. Ryan sighed and traced the faded ink with his fingertip. Outside, dawn was breaking. Rays of sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating the little white cockatrice at his feet. Kate, still buzzing from last night's dragon steak feast, darted around the room in frantic loops. "Dragon meat has quite the kick," Ryan observed, a small smile tugging at his lips as he watched her bound back and forth. She looked like a tiny whirlwind, wild and utterly captivating. Ryan slipped the outdated, pure-blood list into his pocket and feigned a casual stretch. With his body transformation at level 4, staying in peak physical condition was second nature. No need for theatrics, but the act helped calm his nerves. 10 minutes later, a low, resonant roar rolled through the cavern. It was neither frightening nor crude. The sound carried the weight of ancient power and stirred a sense of solemn wonder. The zombie trail had arrived, or, more precisely, the passageway to it. Ryan exhaled in relief. The exit wasn't at the dragon's rear, a detail he found more psychologically comforting than the promise of novelty, but instead emerged from the creature's stomach. Beyond that lay nothing more exotic than an ordinary stone staircase. To be honest, he felt a twinge of disappointment. A tunnel through a dragon's hindquarters would have at least been memorable, if decidedly unpleasant. Climbing out of its belly, however, even if it lacked flair, felt infinitely more dignified. Ryan and Kate stepped onto the cold steps. He glanced back at the massive beast awaiting them. Its emerald scales glittered in the morning sun, each plate intricately patterned. Two long golden horns swept back from its forehead, framing a pair of deep, molten gold eyes that seemed to bore straight into their souls. The dragon's neck arched gracefully toward the ground, as if inviting a closer look, or perhaps simply observing its guests. At that moment, a slender figure emerged from the shadows. A thin wizard, clad in muted robes, removed his pointed hat with a flourish. He bowed deeply, then straightened and gestured down a narrow side path, half hidden behind a curtain of moss. "Mr. Ryan, Miss Kate," he intoned in a voice soft as silk, yet clear as a bell. "Welcome to Zombie Avenue." He stepped aside, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with strange glyphs and flickering torches. Beyond lay unknown horrors and countless opportunities. And so, without another word, Ryan and Kate began their descent. It hardly qualified as a path. The ground was the dull yellow of dry earth, yet beneath their boots it felt as smooth as polished stone. No clods of soil clung to their soles. On either side, tangled undergrowth whispered against cloaks, and every so often they spotted a flobberworm curled in the L-Eve litter until a gaunt imp crept forward, its bony fingers tearing one apart. In the near distance, a squat wooden cabin emerged from the gloom, its weathered planks half hidden by the dim forest light. To its left, a still lake mirrored the canopy. To its right, a broad, level cemetery stretched away, tombstones vanishing into the mist-wreathed trees. The woods beyond wound endlessly, as if daring anyone to find their edge. A murmur ran through the group. Was this the dreaded zombie trail? A trail hardly seemed adequate, and please, there were no whacking trees here to keep the undead at bay. Still, come sundown, they'd be huddled inside that cabin, bracing for an onslaught of the risen dead. "Tonight, we stay here until tomorrow evening." The thin wizard's voice cut through the twilight. He gestured toward the cabin. "At 6 each night, the zombies reanimate. This house is our safe zone. And unlike our last journey, you may use magic freely inside these walls." With that, he turned on his heel and strolled back down the track, unhurried and confident in their fortress of timber. "Why don't you apparate?" Kate asked, nodding toward the scrawny wizard who'd stumbled and fallen a short distance away. "Maybe I haven't gotten my license yet," Ryan replied with a rueful sigh, his gaze drifting to the long cemetery wall rising on their right. At least now he was free to wield magic without restriction, and believe me, he intended to. Normally, traces of harmless spells could be wiped clean by restoring the surroundings to their original state. But a poisonous hex or a vicious curse? Those left tainted marks that no simple reversal could erase. If any of the undead guardians carried such a malediction, they'd have to be replaced entirely. "Let's hope this trip doesn't turn into a complete nightmare," he murmured, squeezing Kate's hand. "I just have to remember not to get carried away." Steeling himself, he pushed open the wrought iron gate. Together, they stepped into the silent rows of ancient tombstones. Chapter 55, Lamora Fish. The dawn air was cool as a gentle breeze swept across the lake, coaxing ripples over its glassy surface. Beneath the water's clarity, a school of silvery fish darted back and forth like living shards of moonlight. Such a sight was extraordinary. Lamora fish were supposed to be native to the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, not this secluded mountain lake. Kate and Ryan stood by the window of their dorm room, peering down at the spectacle. Ryan, ever eager to show off his magical knowledge, nudged her. "Kate, have you ever seen anything like this?" She shifted onto her toes for a better look. "Fish," she answered dryly, "but I've never seen ones like these." He grinned. "These are Lamora fish, a rare magical species. They shouldn't be here." She raised an eyebrow. "And what special magic do they have?" she asked, already suspecting he'd prepared a lesson. "Rumor has it their magic can draw ships off course. Here's a hint. There's a similar fish known to Muggle scientists." "Really?" Kate leaned closer, intrigued despite herself. "What do Muggles call their version?" "Mirrorfish," Ryan said. "Not truly magical, of course, but they possess an uncanny ability to reflect light in patterns, so mesmerizing that sailors once claimed they saw whole coastlines shimmer in the lake's depths. Kate crossed her arms, watching the silver glimmers as they vanished beneath the surface. "Sounds like we'll never be bored in Ravenclaw Tower," she murmured with a small smile. "Between arcane fish and Penelope's revision marathons, there's always something new to distract us." Ryan chuckled. "At least it isn't a full moon, right?" As the sun peeked over the horizon, the lake brightened and the school of lemora fish scattered into the shadows. Kate and Ryan exchanged a conspiratorial glance, both aware that this unexpected discovery might be the start of a far more adventurous chapter than any exam could inspire. Chapter 3. The Lemora Fish. Ryan flipped through the leather-bound bestiary resting on his knee. The English name for this creature is remora, which comes from the older term remora. Its most distinctive feature is the suction disc on its head, essentially a natural anchor it uses to cling to larger sea creatures and hitch a ride. Kate leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "A suction disc? So it's like a living tow line?" "Exactly." Ryan tapped a diagram of the fish. Sailors from antiquity believed remoras could latch onto ships and slow them down, or even bring them to a complete halt. They became known as guardians of the sea, offering protection from storms by stabilizing vessels. Kate's eyes widened. "I've heard that legend. Mariners swore that remoras stuck to the hull to keep their ships steady. No wonder they treated them with such reverence." Ryan reached over and adjusted the bestiary's binding. In the wizarding world, the International Confederation of Wizards classified them as protected creatures long ago. Poaching or harming a remora is strictly forbidden and punishable by heavy fines, if not outright exile. "But there's a darker side to their story, isn't there?" Kate asked, recalling something from her lessons. Ryan nodded gravely. "The legend probably has roots in a far more dangerous species, the lemora fish. According to historical records, during the Battle of Actium, a lemora attached itself to Mark Antony's flagship, crippling his fleet and tipping the scales in Octavian's favor. Some accounts even claim a lemora was responsible for Emperor Caligula's untimely death when it stalled his royal barge in the middle of a storm." Kate shivered. No wonder the Muggles only know the harmless remora. They have no idea of the magic that once changed the course of history. With a thoughtful sigh, Ryan snapped the bestiary shut. "And that," he said quietly, "is the legend of the lemora fish." He laid the book on the table, the candlelight casting dancing shadows over its worn cover. Kate's cheeks were tinged pink from the biting wind. She shivered and rubbed her hands together. "Ryan," she said, peering into the murky water, "I still don't see any suckerfish you mentioned." Ryan smiled, amused. "The fish with the distinctive sucker is a mullet, first catalogued by a Muggle naturalist, but those aren't the only strange things in this lake." Kate frowned and glanced around as a light snow flurry swirled at their feet. "I do see what looks like lemora fish. Are we to believe this body of water connects all the way to the Indian Ocean? Or did some wizard on that horror expedition magically transport them here?" He stroked his chin, playing along. "If that were the case, I'd expect evidence of oceanic currents, or at the very least, some coastal sediment. Besides, zombies are supposed to be endemic to South America. The Indian Ocean is rather distant from that region." "No," Kate countered, her eyes bright with curiosity. "A potent confusion charm blankets this area, and nowhere did they specify that we're in America. Sure, zombies are common there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be America." Ryan finished for her, nodding. "Exactly." "But, Ryan," she pressed, stepping closer, "with your tracking charm and geographic wards, you should be able to pinpoint our location in a heartbeat." He shook his head and gave her a sly look. "I'm afraid that's classified. Feel free to hazard a guess at where we really are." Kate's lips curved into an exasperated half-smile. "You little devil," she muttered under her breath. Ever the puzzle addict, she would no doubt chase this mystery until well past lunch. And Ryan, of course, would enjoy every moment of it. Ryan couldn't shake off thoughts of Ignotus's predicament or that disastrous zombie fiasco back in Africa as he chased after Kate. "Chilo, wait up," he called, fumbling to keep pace. Kate skidded to a halt, her tablet clutched under one arm. "Ryan, where exactly are we?" He offered a mischievous grin. "Take a guess." She shot him a skeptical look. "Let me guess. Another one of your treasure hunts since you started droning on about Lamora fish? Her words cut off as a distant clock chimed 11. From the floor above, a delicate melody drifted down, gentle, rhythmic notes like raindrops on leaves, while the air filled with the heady scent of spices. Lunchtime, Ryan announced. Kate's irritation vanished in an instant. Finally! She bolted up the stairs as though propelled by pure anticipation. In Romania, Ryan and his friends had already sampled more local delicacies than they could count. Today's midday feast was no exception. Ryan followed with a chuckle. Ready for the grand feast? At the top of the staircase, a vibrant yellow carpet unfurled before them, leading into a sunlit dining area beside an open balcony. There, a long table groaned under an array of dishes, bowls of chickpeas, seared steaks, golden roast potatoes, crispy fried chicken, and steaming pasta tossed in fragrant sauce. Kate inhaled deeply, her eyes lighting up. This smells incredible. Ryan grabbed a plate. Then let's eat. For a moment, the mysteries of Ignotus and the specter of Romanian zombies faded away. All that mattered were the flavors waiting to be discovered at this grand Romanian lunch. Kate slumped into a rickety chair, her disappointment obvious as the afternoon sun gilded her nose and bathed her in yellow light. Who decorated this cottage? A Hufflepuff? Ryan teased, nodding at the garish mustard rug underfoot. Kate said nothing, tearing a hefty chunk of meat from her chicken leg and chewing with feigned indifference. He grinned. She'd complain if she truly cared. Well, India was once under British rule, so these English lunches are. It's still India, Kate sprang up. Ryan, you fell for it. And that carpet? Pure Hufflepuff overkill. Night fell swiftly. Without warning, the cabin's lights sputtered out, leaving them in near darkness. A low, guttural moan rose from the woods just beyond the porch, the unmistakable sound of zombies closing in. In the gloom, Kate's voice trembled. Ryan, there's no dinner here, is there? Before he could answer, a blast of heavy metal ripped through the dying zombie moans, surging into fierce, electrifying chords. Outside, across the lake's glassy surface, silver flashes danced beneath the moonlight. Lamora fish, their scales shimmering like living lightning. The Lamora fish began to circle the lake's center, their silvery bodies tracing perfect arcs beneath the surface. Slowly, a stone platform rose from the depths, water dripping at its edges, but miraculously dry in the middle. As the fish swarmed toward the wooden pavilion on the shore, a shimmering silver underwater bridge unfolded where they met. Ryan grasped Kate's hand and, heart-pounding, stepped onto the water. To their astonishment, the surface held firm as they crossed to the platform. Walking on water felt like a dream. Even in a world of wizards, this would be the sort of miracle people talked about for years. Ryan couldn't suppress a grin. Spending every coin on this experience had been worth it. With a soft creak, 2 chairs and a stone table rose up for them. Laid out before them was a sumptuous Indian feast, steaming bowls of rice, chicken curry, egg curry, chickpea curry, and golden masala pancakes alongside a nest of crispy fried noodles. Raw green peppers and sliced onions waited as fresh, crunchy sides. Best of all, gleaming cutlery had appeared, ensuring they could fully savor this surreal banquet. The Romola fish scattered at once, diving deep to the bottom of the lake. The distant moans of the zombies reached our ears, but the graves closer to us lay undisturbed, and thank goodness, so did our dinner. The faint odor of decay threatened to spoil our appetites. Kate, you should eat first, Ryan said, his eyes still fixed on the tree line. Those zombies aren't as far away as you'd like to think. Chapter 56. A Date with Zombies. Moonlight glinted off the placid lake, and the cold beam from the ancient stone table cast everything in a silvery blue haze. At first glance, the scene was almost romantic, until the guttural roars shattered the calm, and rotting hands clawed their way out of freshly disturbed earth. Undead figures staggered into view, their ragged clothes falling in tatters. A chill ran down Kate's spine. Yet despite the creeping horror, the rich aroma of curry held her in place. An hour had slipped by since they'd sat down to eat, and to their astonishment, the dish, served on a magically heated platter, had never gone cold. Even more miraculous, as more zombies rose from their graves, the stench that should have assaulted their senses simply vanished. It's creepy, yes, Ryan admitted with a grin, but at least our dinner's still hot. Kate poked at her nearly empty bowl. We're just gonna sit here all night, watching zombies shuffle around, my wand's practically rusting from inactivity. Ryan laughed and reached for her hand. All right, let's stretch our legs. Before Kate could object, he stepped off the stone bench and onto the lake's surface. Her eyes went wide. How? What are you doing? She stammered. Walk with me. Ryan's voice was playful, yet confident. To Kate's amazement, the water held firm under his weight, rippling gently where his boots met its surface. Summoning her courage, she followed and felt the lake support her too. Kate bounced in place, half in disbelief. This is impossible, Ryan whispered. Believe it, there's a spell woven into the lake itself. As they glided forward, the moonlight illuminated schools of silvery lamora fish darting beneath the surface. Their scales flickered like living stars in the depths. Kate knelt, brushing her fingertips through the water. They're beautiful and harmless? For now, Ryan said. He guided her toward a circle of giant lily pads drifting at the center of the lake. There, they set down their bowls and resumed eating, the curry's warmth spreading through them again. From this vantage point, the zombie horde trudged around the old stone table, unable to reach the magical boundary that protected Ryan and Kate. Their groans and snapping jaws sounded distant, almost muffled by the gentle lap of water against lily pads. Kate sighed with relief. You know, I never thought I'd go on a date with zombies, but this view, this whole night, it's kind of perfect. Ryan winked. Only the best for you. They leaned back, forks forgotten for a moment, and gazed across the lake. Silverfish danced below, undead groaned in the moonlit gloom, and the curry was still deliciously hot. It was a night neither of them would ever forget. Thanks to the fish's residual magic, we don't even need to form a bridge anymore, Ryan explained as we stepped onto solid ground. They'll support our weight just as well. It's all in the manual kept in the dragon's belly. A manual? Kate scoffed, tossing her hair back with playful confidence. I didn't read it. Besides, imagine how dull our adventures would be if we all pored over the guidebook. I shrugged and followed them back to the wooden house. As we approached, dozens of tiny green lights flickered to my right, drifting through the darkness like fairy lanterns. But a second glance froze me in my tracks. They were glowing zombie eyes. Romantic fireflies, indeed, Ryan cursed, recalling the phrase from the manual. That author is pure evil. Maybe Indian wizards find this beautiful, but I think it's grotesque. The green orbs multiplied, swarming around us, and an overwhelming stench, like damp, moldy socks baking in the summer heat, rose from the grass. It thickened the air, turning my stomach. Guys, this smells lethal, Ryan muttered. Without lifting his wand, he murmured the words of a head-warding spell, twice, wrapping Kate and himself in shimmering, protective sigils at once. We stood back to back, bracing for the unholy horde of romantic fireflies and whatever else the night would throw at you. Kate, I think I finally understand why you're so fascinated with the living dead, vampires in particular. Why's that? Kate asked, casually wiping her wand along the hem of her robes. Vampires are fastidious. You can't say the same about zombies or ghouls. Zombies are hideous and reek. Ghouls might look grotesque, but at least they don't smell. Absurd. Ghouls may be slimy, with buck teeth and all, but they're invaluable. They feast on spiders, moths, any number of pests you'd rather not share your home with. The only drawback is their noise. They're alarmingly loud. No wonder so many wizarding families keep them tucked away in attics or barns. With a ghoul on the premises, you'll never have mosquitoes, rats, or even troublesome garden gnomes sneaking in. Honestly, that's far more practical than any of Lockhart's gimmicky cures in his latest book. Yet some of the wealthiest households still refuse to keep ghouls. Too ugly, they say. They'd rather hire house elves for their refined service. Kate's eyes glinted with mischief. With a swift flick of her wand, she tapped Ryan's feet and whispered, Adherio pedibus. Instantly, his shoes glued themselves to the flagstones. Ryan let out a yelp and rubbed the bridge of his nose in exasperation, hopping in place as he tried to free himself. I realized too late that this creature was nothing more than a crude, low-grade house elf prototype, an experimental servant cobbled together by a modest wizarding family. No wonder I'd never come across one. The Smiths had never been truly poor, and even their cellars teemed with vermin fed on alchemical scraps. Once they'd acquired genuine house elves, these makeshift golems were rendered obsolete. That explains why ghouls seldom show their faces at the Weasleys' burrow and why goblins stick to their own gardens. Without warning, a yellowed, pus-soaked hand exploded from the nearest tombstone. The ground bulged and rippled like water as a gaunt, gray-skinned figure in tattered rags hauled itself free of the earth. Kate had her wand raised in an instant. "Glue stickus," she cried. A beam of brilliant white light shot out, striking the creature's ankles. Green slime welled from beneath its shabby shoes, gluing them fast to the soil. The zombie thrashed, its sunken eyes fixed on us, but the adhesive held. Then came two sickening cracks. Both its legs snapped at the knees, bone jutting through rotted flesh. Undeterred, it dragged itself forward on those broken stumps, each movement splattering fresh gore across the tombstone. "It's disgusting," Ryan muttered, recoiling. "Even for a zombie, that's, like watching someone with two shattered legs trying to walk. I can't look." "Okay, game time." Ryan drew in a slow breath and channeled his mana into his ivory blade, White Knight, until a searing edge of crimson light coalesced along its length. This was a specialized application of his Shadow Wind Wraith technique. Although Shadow Wind Wraith could counter curses, it wasn't a simple purification spell. It was pure black magic, a toxic curse in its own right. If he unleashed its full power tonight, not a single zombie would remain repairable by morning. In the next instant, Ryan blurred into motion. His body became a phantom to the naked eye as he swept through the onrushing horde, carving the undead into 5 neat squadrons. Each group was isolated, like sections of a poorly shuffled deck. At his flank, Kate flowed through the battlefield with equal precision. She layered shatter spells and rapid bond wards over the clusters Ryan had set aside for her. With each incantation, malformed corpses exploded into fragments or were bound in inescapable fetters. On the right side of the creaking wooden cabin, the tide of rotting bodies that had been advancing in visible waves suddenly faltered. The mass of corpses slowed, wavered, and then, under the unrelenting force of Ryan's crimson-bladed onslaught, dissolved into nothingness. Silence fell, broken only by the settling dust and the distant creak of the old hoe. Use. The battlefield lay cleared, the last vestiges of the undead swallowed by the night. Ryan's heart pounded with exhilaration. He thrust his white-bladed lightsaber wide, the energy sword extending over a dozen meters as he swung it diagonally through the horde. In a single fluid motion, 100-meter stretch of the cemetery, tombstones, coffins, and the shambling undead alike, parted cleanly in two, bones and rubble skittering aside. "Too easy," Ryan muttered, already eyeing the path ahead. 2 kilometers of twisted graves lay before him, hardly the gauntlet he'd expected. Brushing non-existent sweat from his brow, he glanced back at the few remaining zombies, now reduced to a handful of staggerers. "Kate can wrap these up," he said, voice calm. With that, he vanished, and reappeared behind Kate's warded circle in an instant. She spun around, relief flashing in her eyes. "You're back already? Don't tell me you're worn out." "Just a bit," Ryan admitted with a grin. "Go on. Have at them." He strolled over to the raised stone platform where Kate stood, hands weaving intricate gestures. A gentle hum filled the air around her, laced with the faint aroma of something spicy, like hot curry simmering on a fire. Then, with a final flourish, Kate unleashed her spell. A burst of arcane energy ripped through the zombies at the platform's edge. Bodies exploded into clouds of bone shards and splintered armor, every fragment tumbling harmlessly to the ground. The few slow crawlers left were caught in a shimmering net of magical force, their limbs stiffening until they could barely drag themselves forward. Ryan watched, satisfied. Between his lightsaber and Kate's sorcery, the cemetery would soon be nothing more than silent, empty graves, and the trail of the undead would be over. "Quick, imprison them," Ryan barked. Kate's wand flicked once, and shimmering, invisible chains shot out, snaking around the nearest zombies and yanking them off their feet. The creatures thrashed against the spectral bonds, but to no avail. Ryan stared in astonishment. This was the very same warding spell they'd used to lock fortress gates, now repurposed to bind the undead. He couldn't resist a grin. "You've got to have played Pig Farm RPG, right? You're pulling moves straight out of that game." Kate shot him a playful glare. "Funny. Now help me conserve magic. Cast Flat Slide, but keep it level, no tipping it toward us." "On it," Ryan called. He raised his wand and murmured the incantation. In an instant, the cracked earth beneath the zombies gleamed and shifted, transforming into a smooth stone ramp. With a startled moan, each bound corpse slid backward in a graceless tumble, piled atop one another like discarded mannequins. "Perfect," Ryan shouted. "Thunderclap." He thrust his wand forward, and a jagged bolt of lightning arced through the air, striking the chained horde. A blinding flash erupted on impact, reducing the zombies to drifting ash that scattered in the breeze. When the light faded, the courtyard was silent and empty. Kate lowered her wand, brushing ash from her sleeve. "And that's how you clear a level," she remarked. Ryan exhaled, relief flooding his features. "Level cleared. Let's move on before the next wave spawns." He slung his pack over his shoulder, ready for whatever lay ahead. A soft, whirling sound drifted across the deserted cemetery as the evening breeze stirred. In just 30 minutes, the unending tide of corpses had been reduced to bone and ragged flesh, scattered across the ground. Even the tombstones lay shattered and unrecognizable. Here and there, severed heads twitched and let out stubborn, gurgling cries, their green eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. From a distance, they looked almost like the ethereal fireflies said to haunt the lips of the Indian wizard's final spell. Kate stood beside Ryan, her golden, cat-like eyes brimming with disappointment. "Is that it, Ryan? It's over just like that?" "Not quite," Ryan replied, a mysterious smile flickering across his face. He pointed to a half-destroyed zombie head lying amid the ruins. "Wait a moment, and look." Kate's gaze followed his finger to a crumbling tombstone nearby. At first, nothing happened. No brilliant glow, no obvious magical flare, just stillness. Then, with a low, crackling rumble, the earth beneath the debris began to shift. The fragments of tombstone and scattered limbs were drawn back into the soil, as if the ground itself had awakened and was swallowing its own victims. A second crackle erupted from farther off, growing louder as it approached. The two of them exchanged a glance. Whatever came next would not be over so easily. Ryan had already realized that the greatest expense of the zombie trail wasn't the undead themselves or the Lamora fish, it was the land beneath their feet. Corpses of the poor make up the raw material for the zombies, and in India, there's no shortage of those. Lamora fish, a local specialty, grows abundantly in nearby streams at virtually no cost. But the ground had to be bound by scores of wizards, each inscribing complex, stabilizing spells into the earth itself. Once the initial enchantments were in place, only one or two mages were needed to recharge the wards, sometimes none at all. It would be impossible for a handful of wizards to sustain so many undead without those original rune carvings. Magic might be strength for a sorcerer, but even the most powerful spells can't keep hundreds of corpses moving day after day unless they're area of effect magics, like Flame Wave or Thunderburst, that sweep through dozens of targets at once. Using those group spells meant far fewer lost bodies or crumbling tombstones, and the continuous draw on the land's magic remained almost negligible. What truly sealed the deal, however, was the steady flow of traveling wizards who came to live there. Their casual, everyday casting, tiny bursts of energy emitted as they practiced or rested, acted like a constant trickle of mana. In effect, the resident conjurers maintained the land almost without trying, ensuring the zombie trail stayed alive with only minimal upkeep. One unexpected benefit of Hogwarts' ever-strengthening magic was financial. The school gradually no longer needed to hire outside archmagi for periodic enchantment work. Thanks to the steady flow of gold galleons from its coffers, those funds were saved. In effect, the castle's own maintenance came to depend on a simple principle. Gather the brightest young witches and wizards from across Britain, station the most powerful professors within its walls, and even house certain staff members over school breaks. Year after year, their presence only amplified Hogwarts' magical field, until the castle itself seemed to acquire a living, breathing will. It was amid this potent, growing nexus of spells, and fueled by students' restless energy and impatience with rules, that Peeves the Poltergeist was born. He emerged as something altogether new, an indestructible spirit of chaos, impossible to bind and impossible to destroy, a whimsical embodiment of freedom. Yet irony clung to his origin. Though no conventional hex could truly vanquish him, not even Professor Lupin's famed Wadiwasi, Peeves remained forever tethered to Hogwarts, doomed to haunt its corridors, for as long as magic coursed through its stones. By 1876, the school's caretaker, Rancoros Carpe, was the latest in a long line of Hogwarts overseers who detested Peeves. Like his predecessors, Carpe tried tirelessly to rid the castle of its most infamous troublemaker, but year after year, he found himself outwitted, outmaneuvered, and reminded that some spirits simply cannot be tamed. Peeves's long-standing feud with Hogwarts began with the castle's first caretaker, Hankleton Humble, and over the centuries, it only deepened. By the time the current faculty caught wind of his latest antics, nearly every professor had agreed to lay a trap to drive him away for good. They lined up an array of tempting weapons, scimitars, crossbows, even a hefty muzzle-loading rifle and a small cannon, as bait, and rigged a massive bell jar above them with powerful restraining spells. The plan was simple. Once Peeves hovered just beneath it, the jar would drop and imprison him. Naturally, things did not go according to plan. Peeves, sensing the danger, shattered the enchanted bell jar with ease and made off with every weapon on display. Then, for no reason other than his own amusement, he began firing bolts and bullets at random. The Slytherin ghost, the Bloody Baron, Peeves's greatest fear, demanded he stop, but the poltergeist ignored him outright. Within minutes, stray shots endangered students and staff alike, forcing a full evacuation of the castle. Classes were suspended for 3 days while the teachers assessed the damage. To the wizarding world, this was nothing short of a calamity. Peeves has existed since Hogwarts' earliest days, virtually inseparable from its ancient walls. His mischief first emerged alongside the school's founding students, and though the Bloody Baron may be the school's most intimidating specter, much like Professor Snape would later become, Peeves fears him above all. Yet even that fear couldn't stop him from turning a clever trap into his own chaotic triumph. Professor Eupraxia Moore stood in the Great Hall, helplessly watching as Peeves the poltergeist ignored the Bloody Baron's final warning. In his spectral hands, Peeves brandished rifles and cannons, arcane weapons fueled by seemingly endless magical ammunition, immune to transfiguration and impossible to seize. It was, in effect, the perfect war machine, unleashed upon Hogwarts. Rumors swirled that the school's 4 house giants had somehow guided its creation, and that even the motto emblazoned above these ancient walls, Sleeping Dragons, alluded to the menace now prowling their corridors. For 3 harrowing days, gunshots and explosive booms echoed through the castle. Portraits shook on their hinges, students cowered behind classroom doors, and successive attempts to banish or disarm Peeves all ended in failure. The very foundations of Hogwarts trembled under his assault. By the end of the 3rd day, Professor Moore, the headmistress at the time, accepted a bitter truth. She simply did not possess the power to defeat him. So, with a heavy heart, she drew up an agreement that no head of school had ever dared to consider. First, each week, Peeves would be allowed 1 full day's swim in the first-floor boys' bathroom moat, no questions asked. Second, he would have priority over all discarded moldy bread from the castle kitchens, to be tossed at will. And finally, the bakery's best seamstress, Madame Bonneville, would craft for him a brand-new hat, as flamboyant and riotous as his own nature. With these absurd concessions on the table, Peeves at last lowered his weapons. The rifles and cannons vanished as if by magic, and the barrage of gunfire ceased. Order was restored, but not without cost. Hogwarts would remember this episode as the darkest, and, paradoxically, the final, attempt to rid itself of its most notorious resident. In granting Peeves his peculiar privileges, the castle's leaders ensured peace, at least until the next time mischief called. Professor Calpy's brush with the dark magic unleashed in the castle took such a toll on his health that he was compelled to retire early on medical grounds. In the aftermath, Ryan couldn't shake a single, unsettling question. Could this mysterious zombie trail coursing through Hogwarts be designed not only to terrify its victims, but also to harvest their fear, and in time manifest its very own poltergeist? At Hogwarts, even the most talented young witches and wizards couldn't match the raw strength of the 4 giants patrolling the Highlands. Yet a poltergeist, an entity that fed on panic, might prove far more dangerous than any lone giant. Imagine a spirit that thrived on terror, lurking in shadowed corridors and springing its frightful pranks at the worst possible moment. In fact, Ryan mused, If Voldemort had never been a Hogwarts student, or more astonishingly, if he hadn't been a direct heir of Salazar Slytherin, then perhaps the final defeat of the Dark Lord would have fallen not to Dumbledore or Harry Potter, but to the castle's resident prankster, Peeves. Peeves's power wasn't in traditional spells. Over his 1,000 years at Hogwarts, he had grown stronger by feeding on the collective frustration of every student who'd ever bemoaned late-night essays, freezing drafts in the corridors, or draconian rules. Future Death Eaters, too, had unknowingly fanned his growth. Their pent-up resentment toward authority, their simmering anger at professors and prefects, all of it served as fuel for his malevolence. Yet even this ancient mischief-maker rarely dared to cross the line into outright violence. For Peeves to abandon pranks and wreak real havoc, one thing would have to happen. A blind, furious Death Eater would need to hurl a killing curse directly at him. Only then might the centuries-old poltergeist unleash his full, warlike fury. Peeves might be thought of as a first-generation magical being, but unlike the Phoenix, born of immortality and sustained by positive emotion, he never matured into a true member of that immortal lineage. Today, hardly any witch or wizard senses his deeper power. A few simple prank spells will send him scuttling off, and he's even wary of a vengeful ghost. Back when Ryan attended Hogwarts in his Phoenix form, he quietly deployed his reconnaissance skill to probe the magic lurking beneath Peeves's boisterous antics. What he discovered was striking. Peeves's greatest force comes not from wand work or incantations, but from the raw emotions of wizards themselves. In this world, every wizard is, in effect, a god, an architect of reality. But with so many gods in play, they end up stifling one another. Rather than freely bending the fabric of existence, most modern witches and wizards are reduced to practitioners of routine spells, their true potential held in check by peers just as powerful and just as cautious. The later generations, especially Muggleborns, have never wielded the primal might of those first masters of magic. Pureblood lines have, over time, dwindled in strength, many becoming little more than tools for rote spellcasting, some even proving utterly inept. In truth, learning magic is less about acquiring something new than rediscovering the instincts and abilities we all possessed from the start, instincts that our fellow gods have grown afraid to unleash. Any attempt to restore one's original instincts is doomed to fail. When that perilous magical transformation collapses, it doesn't reset nature, it spawns entirely new magical creatures. Chapter 58, Spell Creation. The once clamorous zombie trail, aglow with flickering fireflies of cursed energy, suddenly fell silent. Kate halted, tugging on Ryan's sleeve to draw him back from his reverie. "How long before the next wave of zombies shows up?" she asked, brow furrowed. Ryan swept his senses over the land opposite, probing the residual magic buried in the soil. "About an hour," he replied. Kate groaned and flicked her wand against her palm. "An hour? That feels like forever." Ryan offered a half-smile. "It doesn't have to be that long. This ground is still saturated with curse magic, from the first burial until now. If I channel a bit of my own power into it, we can speed the revival process." She blinked. "Really? Even though we've shattered almost every tombstone and wiped out dozens of zombies?" "Exactly," Ryan said. "Most of the undead have been physically destroyed, and the markers themselves lie in ruins. Some were smashed more than 10 times over. If we keep at that rate, there won't be any cemetery left to animate. But the underlying magic remains intact, like an invisible engine waiting to be cranked." With that, Ryan closed his eyes. He pictured the land as a vast, colorless spring, coiled tight beneath the Earth's surface. Drawing upon his own mana, he fed it into the buried mechanism. Buzz, buzz. The ruined gravestones around them trembled, ancient runic carvings reigniting with faint, ghostly light. Cracks in the soil wove luminous veins as the latent curse energy stirred to life. Within moments, the ground underfoot thrummed with renewed potency. The waiting hour had just been cut in half, if not more. Kate watched in awe as the shattered remnants of the cemetery shivered and glowed. "Well," she murmured, "I'd say that's an improvement." Ryan opened his eyes, a confident gleam in his gaze. "Now we wait, but not for long." As minutes passed, fresh tombstones seemed to rise from the earth one by one. With a final flourish, the last traces of Ryan's magic coalesced into shape, and an invisible presence snapped into being. Sensing the moment was right, Ryan let go. Ghosts shouldn't be born prematurely. If this spirit emerged too early, the wizards shadowing their horror tour would surely meddle. True ghosts are immortal. They can't be banished or forgotten, so while Ryan and his friends might escape any memory wipe spells, their entire expedition risked disruption. Still, the opportunity was too tempting to resist. A poltergeist born of my own magic would behave like Peeves, only far more powerful, and crucially, bound to my command. As for its appearance, I can redesign that later, once we're safely away. After all, Smith's Castle already boasts an alchemy hut that wanders on its own, but it will never match the wonder of a truly moving castle without proper spellcraft. This poltergeist is destined to become the ultimate power core of our stronghold, Ryan thought, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Ryan, you look downright evil, Kate exclaimed, touching his arm. Her expression blended disgust, curiosity, and bewilderment in equal parts. Ryan merely chuckled. The real fun was just beginning. Kate glared at the tombstone and muttered, "What's this little brat up to now?" Ryan waved a hand dismissively. "Relax, he's just a kid who hasn't even grown his hair out yet." "Really?" Kate raised an eyebrow. Ryan tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I tell you, that gravestone looks brand new. We're not far from a full-blown zombie uprising." Kate crossed her arms. "Is that so?" A low, guttural moan cut her off. In the pale moonlight, a gaunt, gray-skinned figure emerged from behind the restored tombstone, flesh in rags, yellowish pus oozing from every wound. One by one, more corpses shuffled into view, their hollow eyes fixed on the living. Ryan studied them with clinical curiosity. "Notice anything odd?" he asked. Kate peered at the zombies' tattered clothes. "Well, they're fully clothed. Last time, their uniforms looked like second skin, literally fused to their decay." "Exactly," N said, a glint in his eye. "If I had a disrobing charm on hand, I could strip them in an instant. Purely academic, of course, like those wizard scholars who study what's under a Dementor's cloak." Kate shot him a withering look. "You're impossible," Ryan shrugged. "Hey, inventing spells is as natural to me as breathing." He glanced back at the horde. "Now let's figure out how to stop them before they get to us." Ryan discovered early on that when his will was strong enough, whether he intended to remove his cloak or summon a gust of wind, his magical energy would instinctively align with his desire. He realized he could compose an incantation in his mind, inscribe its core runes into the surrounding mana field, then attempt the cast a few times. After 2 or 3 tries, the spell would lock into place as a new, reliable incantation. In the frenzy of experimentation that followed, Ryan churned out spells faster than he could catalog them, enough to fill an entire grimoire. Among his most practical creations was the reading spell. Rather than scanning pages with his eyes, he simply tapped a book's cover with his wand, sustained a gentle flow of magic, and allowed the text to stream directly into his consciousness. Another highlight was what he called the lightsaber spell, a streamlined homage to the famed Shenfeng Wuying. It dispensed with any venomous effects or invisible energy beams, instead forging a razor-sharp blade of pure mana, its hilt nothing more than Ryan's wand. Sleek, precise, and deadly, it quickly became one of his go-to tools in tight spots. Of course, not every experiment proved useful. The Berserk spell, for example, unleashed Ryan's most primal instincts, channeling magic solely into raw physical power. It was exhilarating, but dangerously unpredictable, and ultimately consigned to the Do Not Use section of his ever-growing spellbook. Ryan's exceptional agility and almost preternatural magical instincts let him sidestep spells as if he'd foreseen them, so effortlessly that no control charm could pin him down. In truth, he hardly needed those defensive enchantments. His level 4 body transformation skill, combined with his thinking and reconnaissance talents, more than compensated for any gap. The spells themselves were embarrassingly basic, straight out of a low-tier Magic Sakura handbook. The rapid reading enchantment was simply called Read, the lightsaber-style blade spell Sword, and the Berserker Rage charm Instinct. Each was nothing more than its English name, crudely etched into the ambient magical field. As a result, even novice wizards could accidentally activate them by thinking the word, and a few ambitious mages had already taught themselves these spells without ever finding a teacher. That slipshod approach highlighted one thing. Everyday languages. or any tongue spoken by a large population, whether Muggle or Wizard, are generally unusable for incantations. Those words carry established, mundane concepts. You can't just pluck a familiar phrase from common speech and imbue it with arcane power to forge a new spell. Ryan discovered that every new spell he created rested on three essential principles: conceptual unity, purposeful embellishment, and sheer force of will. 1. Conceptual unity. A spell must embody one clear, shared idea. Take the pack spell, for instance. Its sole purpose is to compress and organize luggage. The incantation is simply the word pack, and every caster who speaks it instantly envisions tidying, sorting, and compressing their belongings. That unified intention, Housewife screams pack as she whisks away clutter, was so powerful that it crystallized from a mundane household command into a reliable magical formula. Number 2. Purposeful embellishment. When a spell's core concept lacks inherent cohesion, it can be shaped by layering in specific emotions, vocalizations, and gestures. Ryan's Berserk spell is a perfect example. He infused it with unbridled fury, contorting his voice into a haunting, inhuman timbre and flinging his arms in wild, jerky motions. Though, manic inflections and movements gave the spell its form and permanently engraved its pattern within the magic magnetic field. 3. Force of will. Some spells can be distilled to a single word, provided the caster's willpower is strong enough to sustain them. Ryan's lightsaber spell required nothing more than the caster to imagine themselves as a blade, throw their entire focus into that image, and shout, "Sword!" The heightened willpower threshold alone anchors the spell into reality, transforming pure intent into a flashing beam of energy. By mastering these three pillars, unified concept, deliberate embellishment, and unwavering will, Ryan unlocked a method for forging entirely new spells, each with its own distinctive signature in the annals of magic. These encryption techniques and the art of crafting spells serve a critical purpose. They keep other wizards from instinctively downloading and mimicking magical effects. Otherwise, any witch or wizard could simply speak fly and take to the air, an outcome nobody wants. Before you can even name a spell, you must first have mastered the effect itself, having personally created that magical phenomenon. And when you do settle on a name, it cannot be an ordinary word. It has to intertwine with the emotion that gave birth to the magic. That's why, in the United Kingdom, most incantations are modified Latin or Greek roots rather than plain English. Chapter 59. The Birth of the Sowling. Just as Ryan was mulling over whether to invent a new spell, the crack of incantation cut through his thoughts. "Shatter into fragments," Kate commanded, her wand slicing through the air as a spray of sparkling shards rained down. Ryan sighed inwardly. Magic for undressing? He barely needed a wand to change clothes. Why waste time teaching someone such a trivial charm? He slipped the White Knight's sword and the aspen wand back into his coat pocket, then drew out a weapon he hadn't shown anyone in months, the Black Knight. It had begun as the last, unfinished masterpiece of his father, George Smith, and Ryan had spent years bringing it to life. Beyond its elegant, gun-like frame, the Black Knight housed a fragment of Smith's own magic. Like a true replica of the legendary Elder Wand, it could dramatically accelerate and amplify spells. It, too, resisted the ravages of time. Its wielder would not be corrupted or erased by age, and when fed powerful magical energies, it grew even stronger. Guns needed bullets. The Black Knight demanded something far more extraordinary. What exactly did this weapon consume, and what extraordinary power would it unleash? With that question lingering in the air, Ryan closed his fingers around the Black Knight's grip and prepared to find out. The Black Knight resembled an ancient wand in its intricate craftsmanship, yet it boasted abilities no conventional staff could match. It would never rust or decay, and it stored magic the way a gun holds bullets. Only here, the ammo were spells. Once Ryan poured mana into its core, the weapon automatically recalled the last incantation he had used and fired it as a brilliant, condensed light projectile. Because the Black Knight retained every spell in its memory bank, each successive shot discharged faster than the last, amplifying and accelerating his magic with uncanny efficiency. For Ryan, who traveled from realm to realm seeking out and destroying his enemies, this was the ultimate sidearm. Forged with his own mana, it didn't quite ascend to the legendary power George Smith had once dreamed of, but its endurance was extraordinary. A single magic bullet, fueled by an extra burst of Ryan's energy, could fracture mid-flight into multiple shards, striking several sorcerers at once. Coupled with the bespoke gunfighting techniques Ryan had developed, melding firearms mastery with arcane precision, the Black Knight could fell gods or Buddhas alike. The moment Ryan's fingertips brushed its sleek obsidian frame, the weapon hummed with pent-up power, eager to be unleashed. Despite the massive surge of magic he'd just expended, Ryan still felt alive with energy. He closed his eyes, gently stroking the barrel, and the Black Knight answered his touch as though to say, "I am yours. Let us brawl." Ryan's progress with the zombie trail had always depended on his own strength, but more specifically, on the exceptional quality of his magic. After all, wizards don't grow their power by lifting weights or by sheer will alone. Magic reserves develop naturally as one ages, while real breakthroughs come from mastering new spells, accumulating arcane knowledge, or undergoing profound changes of heart. Even Albus Dumbledore, undoubtedly the greatest white wizard of his age, didn't boast an enormous store of raw magical energy. His advantage lay instead in the refined efficiency of his spells. Ryan, however, was in a league apart. He had not only achieved level 6 mastery of the shadowless creation technique, but had also, if only briefly, harnessed the level 6 death curse and the sacred power of phoenix magic. As the heir to the ancient Peverell line, the very fabric of his magic was of the highest order. For someone like Ryan, further development of the zombie trail no longer meant piling on more raw mana. It demanded a transformative, qualitative leap. It takes a wizard of Dumbledore's caliber to channel uninterrupted magic for an entire hour, and only Ryan, whose power is as inexhaustible as the Ouroboros itself, could hasten the zombie trail's ghosts so close to manifestation. He cradled the Black Knight bullet against his cheek, and in the silence of his mind, wove the splitting spell instead of Avada Kedavra. Shattering it now would destroy the evidence without drowning the cabin in forbidden magic, and keep their secret safe once he returned the ghosts to Smith Castle. "Kate, let's lighten the mood. Find something cheerful." Ryan's eyes swept the cabin and landed on a curious music player, a cross between a vintage turntable and a modern keyboard console. It rattled with a ferocious, pounding tune. Without missing a beat, Kate tapped a few keys, and the cacophony softened into a lilting, wind-like melody. All around them, zombies snarled, and their eerie green eyes pulsed in the dim light. Yet as the gentle music drifted through the chaos, Ryan felt a surge of exhilaration. This was their moment, perfectly timed, perfectly orchestrated, and the game was only just beginning. Ryan swept Kate into his arms and plunged into the onrushing horde of zombies. "Ryan, what are you doing?" Kate's cheeks warmed, but she trusted his strength instinctively. She wasn't frightened. "Dancing. Don't these fireflies look beautiful together?" He smiled and began to spin her gently. They moved in time with a faint drumbeat, stepping across the virtual dance floor. With every graceful turn, Ryan's weapon, a sleek black rifle nicknamed the Black Knight, fired off silver motes of light. The glowing projectiles split midair, ricocheting outward in precise arcs. One by one, they struck the shambling undead, each blast neatly slicing a zombie into 5 flawless segments. Not a drop of gore, just silent, efficient disintegration. Kate laughed, the pure sound echoing over the battlefield. She pressed closer as Ryan led her through a series of whirling footwork that matched the tempo of the music. The dying creatures fell like shooting stars on the ground, disappearing before they hit. By the time the final musical beat faded, the last zombie toppled, struck by a stray shard of light. The simulation blinked off with its triumphant stage-cleared banner. "It's over already?" Kate tilted her head against Ryan's chest, breathless. "Want to keep going?" Ryan lowered the rifle and tucked it away. Kate shook her head, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "No. It's late, and I need some rest." She gently eased herself free, glancing back at the now silent arena. Still feeling the thrill of their performance, she hopped lightly toward the cabin that served as their base camp, her mind buzzing with questions about the weapon's uncanny power. But for now, all she wanted was sleep. Chapter 7. As soon as they stepped inside, the cabin seemed to recognize their arrival. The lights snapped on all at once. Outside, at the center of the lake, the ancient stone platform groaned and slowly sank beneath the dark water. Ryan followed closely behind Kate, watching as the scattered remains of the undead reassembled themselves, the broken limbs knitting back together until the shoreline lay silent and undisturbed. He'd read in the guidebook that as long as they stayed inside at night, the zombies couldn't rise again, a thoughtful safeguard for any weary wizard passing through. Ryan set his wand on the mantel, slipped the enchanted music player into a hidden corner beneath a loose floorboard, and settled onto the sofa with a well-worn spellbook. As he studied the incantations, his mind wandered to his next project, how to summon the restless spirit and what shape it should take once it appeared. The cabin's layout was unusual. There was no private bedroom. Tonight, the living room would serve that purpose. Down a narrow hallway lay the bathroom, and it was extravagantly out of place. Legend said an Indian sorcerer had overseen the renovation. The floor and walls gleamed like ivory inlaid with veins of gold. Yet oddly, the sink, toilet, and bathtub were entirely ordinary, plain porcelain fixtures against a backdrop of opulence. Moments later, Kate emerged in fresh pajamas, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. Ryan stood and followed her into the bathroom, only to wrinkle his nose at the bubblegum pink sleepwear she'd chosen. Kate shot him a mock glare, and he couldn't hold back a grin. For a brief, perfect moment, the world of spells and specters, of zombies beyond the lake, slipped away as they shared a laugh. Just two friends in a strangely enchanted cabin, ready to face whatever the night might bring. About 15 minutes later, Ryan stretched out on the sofa bed and pretended to read. Kate pulled her new vampire novel from her bag and kept sneaking glances at him, no doubt imagining a handsome, brooding vampire version of Ryan, tangled up in a centuries-old rivalry with ghost hunter Kate. She couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow night, when their final adventure would begin in the mysterious Haimu Triangle. What kind of transport would they use? Would they really meet mermaids right out of a fairy tale? Bathed in the lamp's soft glow, Ryan and Kate soon drifted off to sleep, anticipation dancing in their dreams. Chapter 60. The Hearth of the Castle. A cold wind whispered through the trees as midnight approached. Seated inside a small wooden shack beside the old zombie trail, Ryan closed his eyes and began to chant a long, intricate incantation. Unseen by any mortal onlooker, he wove Smith family blood magic into the air, a subtle, untraceable force. Down below, the restless corpses in the cemetery were eerily still, as though unaware that a wizard was at work, and far too deep in slumber to worry about disturbing Kate in her quarters. Ryan's magic wrapped itself around the nascent spirits rising from the earth like a silken net. With the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, he excised every shred of fear or excitement, emotions that would have betrayed his ritual to curious bystanders. 15 minutes passed in silence, broken only by his soft, measured breathing. Then, in his outstretched palm, a perfect sphere of silver light blossomed. Without hesitation, Ryan invoked the final words of the spell. In an instant, the shack and the moonlit graveyard vanished. He materialized instead in the heart of Smith's ancestral castle, thousands of miles from the zombie trail. Oil lamps flickered to life along the grand hall's stone walls, and torches ignited down every corridor, casting dancing shadows on tapestried banners. At his feet, the elven guard Jack knelt in respectful silence. The point of Jack's long spear tapped gently against the flagstones as he raised his gaze. "Jack," Ryan said, his voice calm but resolute, echoing lightly in the elf's mind. "Do not worry. I will only be gone a short while." A faint glow still clung to Ryan's lips, an aftertaste of the incantation. He turned his attention to the silver orb, cradling it as though it were a fragile bird. Drawing upon the ancient authority of the Smith lineage, he wove a complex mental command. The castle's gates silently thudded closed. The alchemy hut in the gardens awoke with humming lanterns. The entire household and every hidden corridor fell under his watchful vigilance. With the hearth fires blazing and his wards firmly in place, Ryan prepared for the journey ahead. The fate of the realm rested in that glowing sphere, and in the secrets he had yet to uncover. Like roaring tides, the magic sealed for millennia awakened at Ryan's command. As these hidden currents surged to life, the name Ryan Smith vanished from the Hogwarts admissions ledger as though it had never existed. In Ollivander's dusty archives, every record of Smith's wand purchases dissolved into mist. Even the goblins at Gringotts blinked in confusion, their memory of the Smith vault door slipping away. All this unseen power funneled toward the Smith's gleaming silver-white alchemy hut. Clutching the smooth orb, the keystone of his family's ultimate weapon and their most precious inheritance, Ryan ascended the polished marble steps. The moment he crossed the threshold, countless magnificent runes sprang to life on the orb's surface, tracing themselves in glowing lines of gold. From the exact center of the hut came a steady heartbeat, faint but insistent. Ryan closed his eyes, summoning in his mind the spirit he intended to call forth. Then, boom, 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 the waves of energy he alone could sense crashed against their unseen boundary and fell utterly silent. In the hush that followed, a perfect sphere of white light hovered midair, bathing the silver walls in a serene glow. Ryan exhaled, awe and relief flooding through him. He brushed a bead of sweat from his brow and whispered, "Lord? I'm here. What can I do for you?" The sphere's voice rang out, robotic, unyielding. "Restore everything to normal," Ryan ordered. In an instant, his command took effect. In Hogwarts admission records, Ryan Smith's name reappeared. At Ollivander's, every vanished transaction and purchase record returned as if they'd never been erased. And deep beneath Gringotts, the hidden entrance to the Smith vault solidified back into existence. Back in the wooden cottage, Ryan changed into pajamas and flopped onto the sofa. To lay beside him, still and peaceful. A satisfied grin spread across Ryan's face. "Smith's castle is truly alive," he said softly, "just like Howl's moving castle." Indeed, from its enchanted rooftop garden to the secret canyon used for delivering mail, the castle could now uproot and relocate at will. The magical power required was but a trifle to someone of Ryan's skill. He had replaced the old furnace core with a living, immortal spirit, an entity born of centuries of Smith family alchemy, fused with his own magic. With a thought, Ryan could connect his mind to the castle, seeing through its windows and hearing whispers along its corridors. Here, within these animate walls, his power was absolute. No wizard in the world stood any chance of defeating him now. The castle's teleportation magic may cover the cost of apparition, but it was useless to Ryan. As for the spirit he'd defeated, Ryan had already scattered its remains along the old zombie trail. After all, if you dig something up, you should at least leave the roots behind for whoever comes next. With that thought in mind, he let his guard down and drifted back to sleep. A soft tickle roused him. Then came the warmth of sunlight on his face and the gentle rhythm of someone else's breathing. Ryan's eyes fluttered open to find Kate hovering over him, a stray lock of her hair tickling his cheek. "Ha! Bad breath attack!" he teased, blowing a playful puff of air her way. Kate just sniffed. "There's nothing there," she said, as if she'd been expecting the stunt, and made no move to dodge. "Right," he said sheepishly, rubbing his head. In an instant, he floated to his feet. His rumpled nightshirt slipped away like water, replaced by neat daytime clothes. At the same time, his socks and shoes flew over and settled snugly on his feet. Kate, unflustered by Ryan's supernatural routines, reached for the owl-delivered issue of the Prophet's Daily she'd placed on the bedside table. With the morning sun streaming in, the two of them settled into a quiet breakfast, ready to face whatever the day might bring. Being this powerful came with its quirks, insatiable hunger, bad breath. But Ryan didn't have to worry about any of that. No sooner had Kate stirred awake than their wooden cabin seemed to sense the change. A soft, romantic melody drifted through the air, accompanied by the gentle murmur of flowing water at the window. "Breakfast?" Kate guessed, yawning. "Over the water again," Ryan replied with a half-smile. For most wizards, dining on a floating terrace was a rare treat. For Ryan, it was nothing more than a flick of the wrist. He still paused to admire the scene. In the early morning sun, the Lamora fish glowed like living jewels beneath the surface, and tiny motes of light drifted through the water. Unlike yesterday, the sparkle didn't arch overhead but dwelled freely in the lake itself. Then, as if summoned by their thoughts, a grand parasol blossomed into being above the stone platform. Ordinary chairs reshaped into plush loungers, and upon the table appeared a lavish breakfast spread: fragrant red curry chicken, a generous pot of steaming pumpkin juice, and a tower of delicate cakes. Kate let out a delighted laugh, led the way onto the deck, and sank into a lounger. The morning had never looked or tasted more perfect. The plates of curry, the stacks of cakes, and the pot of pumpkin juice were magically refilled the moment they ran low, until Kate finally waved her fork in surrender. "I can't eat another bite," she admitted. Almost at once, the curry and cakes faded away, leaving only the now iced pumpkin juice behind. After dinner, Ryan, still restless, dragged 2 old wooden chairs out to the lakeshore in front of their cabin. Kate tapped her wand on the deck rails, and the chairs hovered, wobbling above the water. With a laugh, the 2 friends climbed aboard and set off on an impromptu duel. Each chair lunged at the other, trying to unseat its rider. Ryan's chair, under his steady control, twisted and bobbed like a seasoned matador, dodging every one of Kat's wild charges. Kate let out a frustrated cry as her own chair careened sideways. One of its legs splintered, forcing her to lean hard to stay aboard. Then with a final, errant sweep, her chair shot forward and careened into open air beside the cabin. Kate tumbled off and splashed into the shallow water. "That's enough! I give up!" she panted, pushing damp hair from her forehead. Her cheeks glowed bright red. "You weren't even breaking a sweat, and I'm ready to keel over." Ryan coasted his chair to a gentle stop and hopped down. "You've got to finesse your moves, Kate," he teased. "Brute strength only gets you so far. Try changing angles, mixing it up. Trust me, I was matching you stroke for stroke." Kate wiped her face and scowled good-naturedly. "Fine, next time I'll show you." She picked up her wand, already planning a comeback. The 2 friends trudged back to the cabin, plotting ever more daring chair duels on the horizon. Ryan folded his arms, unmoved. "By all logic, you should be able to hit me." In that instant, Kate's chair snapped back into its original shape and shot forward through the air, shadowed by the other chair that Ryan had been controlling. Together, they flew straight for the cabin.